Hello, hello. My name is Casey Lau, and welcome to the Hyper Room, my podcast where I talk to the biggest names in pop culture, from comics to toys and beyond. This is probably the most epic episode of the Hyper Room I have ever recorded. My guest on this episode is David Mandel, a man with a resume so impressive and a collection so incredible, he should have his own podcast, which he does, called The Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, and Season 3 is starting next week. David was a writer on my favorite TV show of all time, Seinfeld, and wrote the legendary episodes like The Bizarro Jerry, an episode only a comic book fan would or could come up with. David's credits include being a writer, showrunner, producer, executive producer, director, and even an actor on everything from Saturday Night Live to Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Veep, Eurotrip, The Cat in the Hat, The Dictator, and the Clerks Animated series. But his connection to the Hyper Room is his legendary collection of comic book original art and movie props. And so we dive deep into his love for Steve Ditko, Ralph McQuarrie, as well as his own personal writing jobs, and I get the lowdown on his Nightcrawler series I hope he one day writes. This is a 2-hour plus mega interview. The first hour is all about his Hollywood career, and the second is all about David's love for pop culture. And he was extremely generous with his time, as he's in the middle of editing a new HBO show that I cannot wait to see. So, it's with my great honor and with a huge giddy up that I welcome David Mandel inside the Hyper Room. The Hyper Room. Okay, hey David, how are you doing?
Hey Casey, how are you?
Great. So exciting to have you on the show, on the Hyper Room today. I've got so many things to ask you.
We should say to everyone, late night Hyper Room, because it's late. So thank you for doing this late. Yeah.
It's late, but it's exciting. I'm super jazzed. Before we got on, I've been watching Seinfeld just to remember all the great lines you've written. So we're going to talk a little bit about your Hollywood career, and then we're going to jump into like deep comics, movie props, and all the exciting nerdy things that this show is really about.
I'm all yours, whatever you want. Yeah.
You know, I'm not. This is not a comedy show, but podcast. But you know, if I have you on the show, I've got so many questions.
It is tonight.
It is. Great. Okay, so but first, let's put some context around it.
Yeah.
You know, I want to start with your comic book background. Like, you were a child of the 70s and 80s. You know, what were your first memories of comics? How did you get into comics? What were your favorite comics?
I was born in 1970, so I'm 51 years old right now. My first, earliest, craziest memories of comics, which were not good, but they're good memories, were I used to get my haircut at the old FAO Schwartz toy store on Fifth Avenue and 59th Street. And upstairs, they had it like on the 4th floor. There was a kid's barbershop, and my hair was cut by Mr. Rudy. And Mr. Rudy had another customer whose dad must have had something to do with Marvel, because when you went to Mr. Rudy, there were always the comp copies. They would be the comic books like stamped, not for sale. And it was always the really weird licensed comics. So it would be like Godzilla and Shogun Warrior and the Human Fly, like all of those kinds of things. So my earliest comic memories are those comics. And like, you know, being blown away when you actually got like a Godzilla that the Avengers were in, but also not knowing that the Human Fly wasn't actually the world's greatest comic ever. So that's kind of my earliest memory. And what I do remember, though, is part of that was just kind of like, you know, kind of seeing comics for the first time, you know, being drawn to the things I knew probably as a kid from TV, because again, I'm a little kid at this point. So I recognize like Spider-Man from like the Electric Company, and like there were like, and the old Spider-Man, those cartoons. And then like, there was like, I think like there was that 70s Batman cartoon. So there were things like that I kind of recognized. And so I gravitated, again, mostly newsstand buying, to like, initially like the Electric Company comics that were the Spidey, whatever those were called, like Spidey Super Stories or something like that. Super Friends, because I love the Super Friends cartoon, the Super Friends comic book, like all those sort of, I don't know what you want to call them. In my mind, they were like the starter comics, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and then from there kind of newsstand buying and that kind of a thing, and then started to discover that there was a comic book store called West Side Comics on
Yeah.
86th, like
Yeah.
16 blocks from my house,
Yeah.
and sort of discovering that and getting more and more into it. The
Yeah.
first comic that I really remember like loving and collecting, honestly, though, was X-Men, like
Yeah.
Claremont X-Men, Chris Claremont X-Men, Chris Claremont, John Byrne. That was really for me where I kind of not only like was reading and had to have the next issue, but also started going backwards and filling in issues, but also like loving it, like really feeling like I'm addicted to it. In my own way, like that was my soap opera. I didn't watch, a soap opera, but I read that
Yeah.
and got way into the characters. And yeah, I was, sketching and things also, but I was just loving the reading and just like, lived and died, sort of with those characters. And I mean, I told this story somewhere, but I'm happy to tell it again. I can remember, I can remember I had my appendix out in third grade. And when I was in the hospital, in Mount Sinai Hospital, you know, people were giving me comics, but I can remember in the hospital reading the X-Men annual where Nightcrawler goes to hell, and like that comic to this day is a favorite comic.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something funny also that I
Yeah.
don't know if I think I've maybe mentioned to at least friends of mine know this. When I started reading X-Men, I actually initially picked up the old reprints, like Amazing Adventures
Yep.
or whatever I
Yep.
think it was. So I was reading reprints that had like new covers, but were just the old Kirby stories. And so I was reading like X-Men 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like through the Avengers. And it was somewhere in there that I actually saw the ad for the first time for
Yeah.
that, like the old X-Men, you'll
Yeah.
love the new
Yeah.
X-Men, still uncanny after all these years. I didn't know I was reading comics from the 60s. I didn't know I was reading reprints. I thought these are the X-Men and I really liked them. And then all of a sudden it was like, who are these other people? And that's when I went and kind of got my first
So
issue.
that's so
Yeah.
funny. I had the same story. I grew up with. I'm a few years younger than you. I grew up with Marvel Tales. So
Hmm.
when I was reading the reprints, I was growing up with Stan Lee and Steve Ditko.
Yeah.
But I mean, like 30 years later, right? So crazy to be like that. So to have that's why I have never said anything bad about reprints, right? I just
Oh,
love. Without those reprints, um, we wouldn't have like imagine growing up with the Kirby X-Men and the Ditko
no, I mean, honestly,
Spider-Man.
I read those in Marvel Tales as well, the Ditko stuff a little bit. I think I followed that up. By then I knew they were reprints, but I didn't care.
Yeah,
And so to this day, I'm a Ditko guy
I know.
with no
Yes.
offense to
Yeah.
Ramita in any way, shape,
Yeah.
or form, but
Yeah.
I look at that original Ditko run as just the
Same.
perfection of
Yeah.
Spider-Man
Same.
because I read it in Marvel Tales
Yeah.
and the little Marvel paperbacks. There was
Yeah.
like a 6 like paperback box set of the
Yeah.
early Spider-Man
Yeah.
stories. And so that's what sort of like burned into my soul,
Yeah.
those early stories like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. Okay, so let's move ahead a
Yeah.
little bit in your life now. So I'm very interested to hear this part of your life. So you went to Harvard. You
Yep.
graduated from Harvard. You didn't become a doctor or a lawyer. You became a comedy writer, and you got hired by Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. So when I went to Harvard the way everybody thinks they're going to Harvard. I was going to be I didn't think I was ever going to be a doctor. I didn't think I was a doctor, but I certainly thought I was going to be sort of some kind of lawyer, basically.
Yeah.
And I was always a TV and a movie nut, and also a comedy nut. My mom had given me when I was a kid. We cleaned out like. I think like my grandmother was like, take these. And I had like my mom's old albums, and she had all these wonderful old like Mort Saul stand-up albums and like Von Meter's First Family. So like all like the golden age of like 60s comedy albums. And I
Yeah.
remember listening to those. And I went to movies and I lived on the Upper West Side of New York and we still had Revival theaters. So even before like VHS, you could like I remember again my mom taking me to like Hitchcock festivals and things like that. I was always into movies and TV. I loved Saturday Night Live. I loved Letterman was a
Mm.
biggie for me. So I was always really into it. And I read a lot about it and whatever. And I got to Harvard. I kind of realized I wanted to join the Harvard Lampoon, and I
Mm,
basically set out to join it, eventually did join it, and I don't know quite when I made the decision. I mean, right to the bitter end, I was still doing things to keep my parents happy. Like I did like corporate, I don't even know what they call it anymore. I did corporate recruiting, where I
yeah.
would go to like interviews with like Brown Brothers Harriman and whatnot and
Wow.
talk to them about like finance and things. And of course, I had no real interest in it and certainly probably no real ability. I mean, maybe ability, but no interest.
Yeah.
But I even remember like once like going for an interview with like Disney like financial something or other, and I'm asking them questions like, "Does anyone ever move from this side over into like production?" And of course they're like, "Get the fuck out of here." So, but basically, being part of the Lampoon, I just started to realize this was what I wanted to do with my life, and actually through the Lampoon, I was able to work on my first TV project. It was actually a Lampoon parody for Comedy Central called MTV Give Me Back My Life that we did the summer of 91.
Wow.
And it was like a sort of a first taste of it. And I got to meet a lot of people, including, well, no longer, but former Senator Al Franken.
Yeah.
I then, the following summer, wrote for Al when he hosted comedy coverage of the Democratic and Republican conventions,
Hmm.
which was also on Comedy Central. And at the end of that summer, he basically said, I want to introduce you to Lorne Michaels
Yeah.
and I want you to come to Saturday Night Live, which was, yeah, needless to say, pretty incredible.
And
So
that and
that's
that that
that story. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that time you were there was like the time also when I was watching it. I think I first started watching it. So I don't know, I didn't watch Belushi and all those guys, but Mike Myers and
Yep.
Dana Carvey and Phil
Yep.
Hartman, those were my Saturday Night Live players, and that's the time you wrote it. And I did hear another podcast where you actually, one of the funniest things I still remember is Hartman playing Bill Clinton. And when he won, he ran into a McDonald's, a fast food, and started
Yes.
eating all the
Yes.
hamburgers. That's one of your sketches, right?
Yeah, it's actually me and Al wrote that together. Yeah. Yeah. Clinton McDonald's with and he was doing that for real. I mean, we didn't, that part
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
made
right. I
up.
remember that too.
He was
What?
in DC and he was just
Yeah.
jogging and showing up on CNN every day. And he uses the McDonald's food to explain the Somalian warlord stealing food, and he keeps stealing the food off the trays and shoving it in his mouth. And
I hope
it
there's a
was,
movie
yeah.
about Clinton one day because he's also quite a character from that time. So okay, so then how does this go? So you're
Yeah.
doing Saturday Night Live. Of course, this is the launch pad for a lot of writers. Conan O'Brien. We know all these guys are coming out of this, but you go from this at a very young age. I think you're like 24, 25. You meet what do you meet from? You meet Larry David, and you're on Seinfeld at its peak. Talk a
Yeah,
little bit about how that happened.
basically, when I was at the Lampoon, I was writing a lot with two guys, Alec Berg and Jeff Schaefer,
Yeah.
who were a year older than me. So they ended up graduating and they moved to LA, and I ended up moving to New York and doing Saturday Night Live.
Mm.
Then they came east because they were working on the early Conan O'Brien show, but we were always in touch. We were always sort of looking at each other's stuff, even though we weren't, formally partners or anything like that. And eventually, my final year of Saturday Night Live was they ended up getting hired at Seinfeld, was their first year of
Mm.
Seinfeld. And so in a very funny way, what I used to do on my breaks from SNL is we'd get like a week off or 2 weeks off, and I would go to LA, and I was a New York guy. I had no driver's license, and I would stay with them. And in the morning when they woke up to go to work, I would wake up and I'd go to work with them, and I'd go to the Seinfeld offices, and I'd be like, I'd have breakfast with all the writers and be like, hey, and whatever. And then I'd go with them and I would just kind of work the day. I'd help them on what they were working on, and just, it was just really fun. And then if there was anything, like that I, special that I couldn't be a part of, I'd, check the computer and, surf the internet or something. But basically, I was just hanging out, and then during lunch I would get to pop in, and I got to know some of the writers there. I got to know Larry, I got to know Jerry a little bit, and so the following year, I basically was putting together stuff because I loved my time at SNL. But 3 years, I went gray more or less at Saturday Night Live, and I was done, and so I was kind of putting together stuff for Seinfeld. That was my goal because the show to me was, again, uh, not as a comedy person, it was revelatory, but also as a Jew from New York, it was revelatory. And
Yeah.
those two things were like punching into each other in a way, like I'd never seen characters in a show or any kind of piece of entertainment, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like carry a grudge or get angry at somebody the way I felt like I do and my parents do and that kind of stuff. It was just I just felt a real connection to the show along with the comedy as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, anyway, I basically, when Larry actually came to New York at the end of the he was there at the last episode of SNL, my final year, and he had been, I think, if memory serves, he was in like some kind of contract renegotiation. He was like, "I'm coming back, send me some stuff," and then he hired me. So yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's interesting to bring up that New York Jewish stuff because of that. I learned a lot about Jewish and New York Jewish culture by watching Seinfeld.
Well, it's so funny because it's the thing that they always sort of said, like America doesn't care, or America doesn't want to see it, or
Yeah.
America hates, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And of course, I think a lot of what people know about, Judaism, they know at this point from Seinfeld,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I learned more watching Curb as well too, right?
Yes,
The LA
exactly.
version of
Yeah.
that, right? It's amazing. Okay, so I'm not gonna go into like more detail on Seinfeld, but
No, anything again. Yeah.
I really want to know, like, okay, so you came in on season 7 or 6?
7, 8, 9. Yes,
You did
that sounds
7, 8,
right.
9.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
you did the last 3
I did the
seasons.
last 3 seasons because I did Larry's final season.
Yeah.
Larry hired me,
Yeah.
and then the 2 seasons without him. Yeah.
Okay. And then you're working with your buddies, Alec Berg and Jeff Schaefer. They're there
Yep.
with you as well as all the other incredible writers that are on the team. Can you maybe break down for me how
Sure.
the episode is actually written? Because, I watch it since the first season, right? You got the Chinese restaurant. It all takes place in one. It's
Sure.
pretty straightforward. It's very creative, but it's pretty straightforward. And then you get the parking lot one, and they're walking around the parking lot. It's fun, but then they start to get more and more sophisticated, right?
Yeah,
There
the show changes definitely over time. And what you really ended up with was, in some ways, you really built to, as the show got more and more complicated, it really built to really almost each one of the characters had their own story.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's how we approached it. So basically, if you were sitting down to like, okay, I need to come up with a show, you would start pitching your favorite Jerry idea, your favorite Elaine idea, your favorite George idea, your favorite Kramer idea, but you were pitching 4 distinct ideas. Now, it's possible you might pitch an idea that involved 2 characters. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
one story involves 2 characters. So my first episode was the pool guy.
Yeah.
And so in the pool guy episode, Jerry is involved with the pool guy. Kramer becomes the movie phone guy, which is very hard to explain to anybody that's like under 25.
It's people watching on Netflix today are like, what is that about?
Yeah. No, I know you're watching anything you want right now with the press of a button, but we used to dial a phone and press buttons on it to find out when the movie started so we could go there even though you couldn't buy a ticket in advance. But anyway, that was in the 1800s. But in that episode, the George and Elaine story are kind of one story. It's Elaine wanting to become friends with Susan and George getting upset about that. And so that's two, they each have a story, but in that case, there is one story for the 2 of them.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, by the way, you might have your Jerry story on day 1 and your Kramer story on day 2. And then, I don't know, an Elaine story on day 3. And then you might pitch a bunch of George stories and they get turned down. Larry goes, no, that's too similar to something. I don't like that.
Yeah.
Maybe this, maybe that. And it might take, it could take time, but you're basically trying to fill in your 4 stories.
Okay.
And then once you have those 4 stories, which I know sounds crazy because the episode itself, when you're done, if you do it right, it seems like those 4 stories were always together, but they weren't. They were we come up with them individually, separately, put them together, start the sort of outlining process of moving the story forward, and then looking for places that they start to bump into each other and smash off of each other.
Yeah.
And the perfect ones are the ones that effortlessly do that. And like I said, seem like they go together. But honestly, it sort of starts just with, I was thinking for Jerry this. And it's that, as crazy as that sounds.
In the room that's happening, are people also contributing ideas, or this is all you for
No,
this episode?
Seinfeld was very much, Larry and Jerry, neither of them had ever worked at a sitcom. So there is a very traditional writer's room way that sitcoms work, that because Larry and Jerry had never been a part of it, they neither did or nor quite honestly when they heard it they went, I don't understand, why would anyone work like that? And I sort of having been learning from them, and it's a little bit like my own model is a little different, but basically, yeah, I think shows that are written in a room are terrible. I think the
Yeah.
room has a lot of value. I think the room can be a great place to kind of blue sky and pitch ideas about just stuff in general. And I think the room can be a great place to look over something and make it funnier, punch it up, whatever. But the idea of sitting in a room and everybody writing it sentence by sentence and nobody being the captain and nobody being in charge. And so Larry and Jerry did it the way anyone with a brain would do it, which is to say the writer was responsible for sort of pitching out their own show, then outlining their show, which Larry and Jerry would make comments and give notes. And, again, it wasn't in a complete vacuum or anything. And we had the ability, obviously, to in between sessions with Larry and Jerry, I could go to writers and run stuff by them and they might throw things in. So it was all happening, but just not in a room.
Yeah.
And then basically you'd write a script and hand it off. At that point, you'd hand it off to Larry and Jerry. And then later on, when Larry was gone, there was sort of an executive committee where like the script would kind of come to usually myself and another, and usually the writer of the script, myself, maybe Jeff and Alec, maybe somebody else, and Jerry, and then we would kind of work on it together. So it did become a little bit of a mini room, but again, from a rewriting perspective, not from a writing from scratch perspective. And I do think that part of what makes Seinfeld so good was that sort of unique one person's viewpoint through the early stages of it. That at some point, even though it fit into the Seinfeld universe and Larry and Jerry might work on top of you, it was coming from a point of view as
Yeah.
opposed to quip, quip, quip. And it was
Yeah.
story driven, not joke driven. That
Yeah.
was the other big thing. So, I mean, that's a lot of why and what.
And then how long does it take you to write an episode then, like the pool
Well,
guy?
it's funny. If I had the outline done, I mean, these days now, obviously it wasn't like this maybe then, but by the end of Seinfeld, if I had an outline, I could do it in a night or two if I had an outline. But you
Wow.
might spend a couple of weeks on the outline because it's
Got it.
the outline that gets all of that, oh my God. And then George comes in and does this and doesn't realize Jerry's in the bedroom. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like that comes out in the outline. That's not the script writing.
Yeah.
So if you know that's all happening, then it's just joke writing. And I don't want to sound like an a-hole. Jokes are easy.
Okay.
It was that intricate story and plotting and
Mm.
taking it to those places that was the hard part.
That
So
makes a lot that makes sense.
you'd outline forever,
Yeah.
not forever, but you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But the writing could actually be very quickly. Could be very quick. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense why the show can never be duplicated because a lot of people just see the joke stuff and the crazy
Well,
characters and
it's
don't
a
think
funny
about it.
thing. The same thing happens a little bit with Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is there's this idea people know that it's improv, which it is improv.
Yeah.
It is, but we are improving. And again, I'm not there anymore, and I wasn't one of the actors. But when I was at Curb, they were improving off of an outline, a multi-page outline that Larry, myself, Jeff, and Alec, because the four of us were doing it together for a couple of years, that we have spent a tremendous amount of time like it was a Seinfeld script. Like we've outlined it so that you could go home and write the script in a night, but we never write the script.
Oh.
They improv off of that outline, but that outline has all of that intricate plotting, it sometimes has key jokes, key moments, important things that need to be said. On top of that, we've all got our own things that we would write in, but we're thinking about so that on the day, as people are improving, we're throwing ideas. It's almost like a live rewrite, which is really cool and really exciting.
Mm.
But where I'm going with this is when Curb became popular and this idea of, oh, it's improv, all of a sudden there were a lot of initially Curb ripoff shows with this idea of like, well, we just make it up.
Yeah.
But they made it up without the outline. And that's why so many of those shows, lasted one episode. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
that's the difference. It's all outline, 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 structure,
Okay.
structure, structure.
So
Yeah.
I want to. So So if in a
Yeah.
time frame from like from the studio, from the network giving you the time, so you take a couple of weeks or maybe a month to write the outline, and then maybe you can write the episode in a day. But how much time are they actually allotting to a season of, say, what is it, 26 episodes?
I mean, we used to go. I think with filming would start like at the end of July, I want to
Okay.
say. Maybe it was early August was the filming.
Okay.
The writers kind of came back together, I want to say like in May, June.
Okay.
Then we'd write for a couple of months, try and get like a bunch of scripts. Then you start shooting those scripts. You do one a week. Then you're editing them while you're shooting and you're writing.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, like, so at one point it's like, oh my God, we got 10 scripts. And then what week goes by and you got 9, then you got 8, then you got 7, then you got
Yeah.
6. And you kind of hope you make it to Christmas. And then it's like, okay, now we got to write the back half. And
Yeah.
so it's a little bit that, that is the wonderful and horrible thing about doing 22 episodes a year. And
Yeah.
what's funny is when I did like Veep, we would do 10 episodes
Yeah.
and we would spend the same amount of time except
Oh,
on
interesting.
10
Yeah.
and not ever remember like how the hell did we do 22 of these? But
Exactly.
the honest answer is, and I don't mean and I think this is true even about Seinfeld, when you have a season of 22 episodes, and again, Seinfeld I think is better than most. Look, let's be honest. There are probably 5 or 6 of those 22 every year that aren't as good as the other whatever. And they're not awful. And they're probably better than a lot of stuff because
Yeah.
hey, they're still Seinfeld.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they're not as good as the best. They're the forgettable Seinfelds.
Yeah.
And then there's, I don't know, another, 7 or 8 that are 10 whatever that are, good.
Yeah.
But then there's also those 5 or 6 that are just like unfucking
Yeah.
forgettable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you do 22 and you hope that like some of them are incredible, some are good, and not too many are terrible.
Yeah.
When you make 10, you are much more hoping that all 10 are special in their own way. Not always accomplished, but you're not, you certainly don't want to have 6 average ones in a season of 10. And again, I'm not thinking like that while we're doing it. I'm just sort of come to those conclusions in hindsight, I guess, as much as anything.
And then, so can you compare, like, that's
Yeah.
that's super interesting to me. Can you compare the room for like a Seinfeld or a Curb compared, because Curb is on HBO, but like Seinfeld was on network, and then
Yeah.
Veep is also on HBO. So is there a different way? It's the same length, probably the same amount of people. Is there any sort of different way of
Well,
working in
like I
those?
said, I sort of, when I was running Veep, I kind of set it up the way I would do it, which is to say, I mean, the easiest way I can explain it is I would kind of come into every season with sort of a plan. And it would be, here are the big things I'm thinking about. And to some extent, I would always like to come out with like, and this is what I think the first scene is of the season. And this is the last scene of the season, which in a weird way throws me into the next season, which I already have a couple of little ideas about.
Yeah.
So I would come in with that. And then we would spend easily a month, just the writers just talking, nobody even moving, just talking, bringing in guests, like different people from, hey, we want to meet a Secret Service agent. Here comes a Secret Service agent. Oh my God, Mitt Romney's coming for lunch. I mean, we would just like talk
Wow.
to people. We want to talk to people from the Washington Post. Here they come. We want to talk to some political reporters. We want to talk to a congressman. People coming in almost like a salon. We're kind of picking their brains. We're stealing their good
Yeah.
stories.
Wow, that's
But it's all
interesting.
kind of going into the machine, into the stew.
Yeah.
And then at some point, I get up and I start to lay out what I think the 10 episodes are. And again, people are helping, but I've started to like get this vision of it. And then I very quickly kind of start to figure out who's going to write these 10 episodes.
Okay.
And now it's their job to take these fragments and start to figure out a show and an outline and what else can they bring to it to make it into something.
Yeah.
And then we begin to work on those things. And when they have a script, I'm kind of looking at it. And then when they have a real script, I'm giving notes. When they have a real script, then everybody's seeing it. We're trying to make it funnier. And then we take it to a table read. So that's sort of my version of a writer's room doing what I think a writer's room does really well, but not doing the part I don't like, if that makes any sense.
Let's bring that into comic book world.
Yeah.
So as a showrunner, you're kind of like the comic book editor,
I guess
the
so.
line editor. You're like Mike Carlin of the Superman.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, maybe I mean, again, it's funny, and I have worked with some editors, and they've all been very good. I mean, my couple of dribbles into actually writing comics, which I can count on one hand. So I've never obviously experienced working on I've never worked on X-Men and worked with the X-Men editor.
Yeah.
But, I think there is a reason why in the comic world there are people with reputations as great editors,
Yeah.
where they are as much a part of the
Yeah.
creative team as
Agreed.
whatever.
Agreed.
I think this is a little bit more because obviously ultimately I'm a writer, I'm also a director and whatever. So maybe I'm editing a lot of people's stuff at the same time I'm somewhere in the middle there, but sort of yes is
Yeah.
my answer.
Okay. And then one more quick question on Seinfeld. Michael Richards.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen interviews with him, and I've seen all the background of him. How do you write for this guy? I mean, I see the word "giddy up" on a piece of paper, and I don't think that's how you deliver
It
that
was
line.
no, I mean, look, and he's the obvious one because obviously what he was doing was so unique. Um, but the truth was, what was so incredible about Seinfeld as an experience for me as a writer was, and this was no offense to anyone at Saturday Night Live, but ultimately, a lot of times you wrote something at Saturday Night Live and it kind of came out the way you thought it would be. Like you wrote, and this person's going to play this part, and they did it the way you thought they would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the incredible thing about Seinfeld was, I remember at my first table read, hearing the four of them say lines and hit different words and different emphasize a different part of the word or a certain word, which is a little different than just giddy up. But I just mean there are line readings that I think of Julia, who I then had the pleasure of working even more with on Veep, where just the way she said, there's an episode where it's the one with George's Susan's parents, and George has lied to them that he has a house in the Hamptons,
Yeah.
and Elaine tells them that it's a lie, and then they know it's a lie, and George knows they know, but he's gets them in the car and is driving them to the house. It's this game of chicken. But there's a scene where I remember Julia as Elaine is arguing with George, and he's like, I told them I told them I had a house in the Hamptons, and her line is like, I told them you didn't, and then I laughed. And I just remember there's a way Julia does this line that to this day she goes, I told him you didn't, and then I laughed, and I'm not doing any justice, but
I know which one
it's
you're
just
talking about.
it's the same. It's a line that the way she put her mustard on it, for lack of any other way of saying it, it's there's no reason you would pick that out as this is going to be the line that kills me every time, and that's what Seinfeld was. So the truth is, Michael was a freak of nature, and certainly was this weird sort of wonderful guy.
Yeah.
But what was incredible about him, and what I got to observe of his process, was he was so, to him there was a logic to all of it, and I think that's what made it so, even though it was crazy and people and big, even though it seemed big, there was such a grounding because he had so many rules and ideas about Kramer and who Kramer was and where Kramer came from and all of those things that in this own weird way, it was really real. And it's why I think people love it so much. But that being said, there were a bunch of little things and again, this is more later on, little phrases, I think there was one from the old FIFA soccer game where there was a character, if anyone played it back in the early 90s, one of the FIFA soccer characters, I think before they were able to use real names and real players, there was a player named S. Wombanga, and I can't remember if it made the final show or if it's just in a script somewhere, but Kramer goes S. Wombanga, and it's a FIFA soccer thing, and I remember there was another one we kept trying to get him to say. We got it into one episode. I think we ended up cutting it, but it was Jerry goes oh my God, blah, 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 blah. And the Kramer line was welcome to Gattaca. But of course, when Michael did it, it was welcome to Gattaca. And I don't know, stuff like that. And again, that's an example of something that didn't make it. But Why? That's not
Oh.
funny, except it
Oh.
is funny when he says it. So there you go.
But
Yeah.
when you write it, when you're writing it, we know these characters. You guys know them better because you're watching table reads, so
No,
you know them.
you are living in their brains a little
Yeah,
bit, these characters, and you do start to think like that's not a George line. This is how
yeah.
Elaine would say it. It's
Mm.
different. And it is. I don't know. Yeah.
So interesting. How about those the bits that he does at the beginning, the comedy bits? Did he write those himself, or did the writers?
Those were all when he used to do the stand up. That was all Jerry. Obviously, whether it was from his act or new things that he would write based on the shows. When Larry left, we got rid of that thing because Jerry obviously had more to do with the show, and we
Yeah,
started doing these little sort of, not always because we started to run out of time sometimes, not time to write them, but we would shoot them and then we'd cut them because the shows were getting a little fatter and it was
yes,
hard to like
yeah,
find
right,
time.
yeah. That's what it felt like.
But for example, in the Bizarro Jerry at the top, there's just them sitting at the
Yeah,
in I can't remember, either an outdoor cafe or a coffee shop or whatever it
yeah,
is, and it's talking about, would you rather be in the
yeah.
aliens kidnap you and take you
Aliens,
out of
yeah. They're
space?
in the
Would
coffee
you rather
shop.
be
I
in the
just
circus or
watched that.
zoo? Yeah, exactly. And we started doing these sort of standalone like coffee shop scenes
Yeah,
of like funny discussions,
yeah.
and I love those. And
Yeah,
those we did do, and I
got
like
it.
that one I did write, and I
Yeah,
loved doing those because it was a great moment of like, there's no story yet. This is just a freebie.
yeah,
It was our version of the stand up, but
yeah.
no, I had nothing to do with the stand up. Yeah, that's a lost art to me. Yeah,
So, I mean, everybody knows that Jerry is a fan of Superman. So
yeah,
having that Bizarro Jerry episode seemed natural. But then I found out you wrote it. And I
yeah,
know and then what we're going to discuss later, you're a big comic fan. So it all came together because I'm like, whoever wrote this episode must have been a comic fan on the show, and that is you. And I've already heard you talk about this, but maybe you got to tell us a little bit more of the
yeah.
story. You had the idea, you pitched it to Jerry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing, and I'll say this, very honestly. I'm not sure it's an idea Larry would have approved. Maybe he would have. I've never asked him, and I don't want to know.
Yeah.
So let's start with that. So it was after Larry left, Jerry was sort of in charge, and it kind of came out of this, a more sort of, it started more mundanely, dare I say, which was just this idea of um, Elaine having a guy that she was breaking up with. And the original pitch was, the cliche where someone says, let's just be friends. What if the guy you said, let's be friends to, actually said, okay, great, let's be friends. And then you're like, what the fuck? I don't actually want, like, that's a blow off. I don't
Yeah.
want to be friends.
Yeah.
So that's where it started. And very quickly it turned into, what if it turns out he's a great friend?
Yeah.
And to some extent, very quickly it became he's Jerry's opposite. And then all of a sudden it was Bizarro. And yeah, and he's Bizarro Jerry. And
Yeah.
when the second I said that to Jerry, he just, I mean, he knew it, he loved it, he went for it. And then honestly, to his credit, pushed me further than I would have done, in the sense of like, I would have made it like a conversation and then maybe that's it. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
But he was like, no, 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 go
This is the
for
whole
it. And
episode.
like, whatever. And really, pushed even for like the me so happy, me want to cry at the end. And again, to his credit, like recognized it, but that's how it started. That's how it came together. But I will say, while they did Superman stuff before me in my 3 years, I think I managed to get in I got the Iron Man underwear
Yeah.
conversation in,
Yeah.
Bizarro
That's right.
Jerry, and I think I'm responsible for the sort of the Wrath of Khan moments as well. I think that was me as well.
Love
Yeah,
that
the
as
needs of the
well. That's so
many
funny.
outweigh the needs of the few or the one. So yeah.
Yeah, that whole thing with Susan dying and him using that line, I was like, oh my, all these little things, they're coming together, 30 years later.
Yes, they're
The
very me, and I leave it at that. Yeah.
what was I going to ask you about that? When going into season 9,
Yeah.
um, you know, did you guys already know this is going to be the last season, or was it?
No, I think if memory serves, that kind of came up post the Christmas break,
Okay.
basically. We went into it. I'm not going to lie, we were pretty exhausted, and
Okay.
I think ultimately that's what had a lot. Again, this is one man's opinion. We were pretty tired. We killed ourselves. It was always we always worked hard. Again, we were, and again, I don't want to. We're not. I'm not digging holes in the ground or anything like
Yeah, sure.
that. So a relative amount. But when Larry left the show, our desire to not cover, but like fill in that gap and whatever, and really we killed ourselves in a great way. And I think that first season without Larry is really, really strong. But we were doing, and again, everyone works hard, but we would do like 63 days in a row and then take off a Sunday and then work 47 days in a row and watch the Super Bowl and
Yeah.
then another 73 days in a row. We were working like
Oh,
crazy.
wow.
And
Interesting.
so when we went into that final season, and again, my opinion, we were beat, we were tired. We probably needed a little bit more new blood. We probably could have used some new writers. Dare I say, we probably could have gotten rid of a couple of people.
Yeah.
Again, it's fact
Same.
of
Yeah.
life. We
Back
were
to
a
life.
little
Yeah.
tired. I think we were dragging a bit. I think there's some very good shows in season 9, but it was harder. It was less fun. I think when Jerry stopped having fun, it
That was it.
became
Yeah.
that was part of the
Yeah.
why and the what.
Probably
And that's, I think, kind
a
of what
lot of
happened.
pressure over the audience,
Well,
right?
it
Demanding
was
high
it's always
quality
that
shows.
funny thing if you look back on the reviews and stuff. And again, I don't think Jerry's driven by reviews, and I don't know, I'm certainly not. I just found it funny. Larry left after season 7. When Larry left, a lot of critics were and viewers, I should say, also were horrified by the killing of Susan. That
Yeah.
this was awful. And a year or two later, it was the greatest thing that ever happened. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
again, people are allowed to change their minds, but the initial like, oh, how could you? That
Yeah.
was the thing.
Yeah.
And Larry left, and we did season 8. And if you look at the reviews at the beginning of season 8, when like the Bizarro Jerry and some of the other episodes were airing, people were like, "Oh my God, Seinfeld still has it." Like
Yeah.
Larry's gone, but the
Yeah.
show is still good. And people
Yeah.
really like season 8.
Yeah.
They didn't seem to like season 9 as much,
Yeah.
and they started writing these articles about how the show is suffering. The show, like Larry's gone, the show suffered. But it was always this funny thing where no, Larry was gone last year, and
Yeah.
Larry
Yeah.
is irreplaceable. But you did like what we did last year. You've just decided this is the narrative. And again,
Yeah.
that was sort of how you used to sort of, for lack of a better word, sell newspapers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I don't know what it is because everyone's a critic and no one's a critic. It's that funny thing. But anyway, long story short, I think it was harder. We were more tired. It was less fun. And Jerry's reaction to it being less fun was ultimately, hey, it's time to end it.
Yeah.
And I think, again, maybe there was a way to do it differently. I mean, not the end. I mean, like if we had like gotten a rest or something, I don't know. Maybe we could have recharged. We didn't. So it
Yeah.
ended. I'm sure there were more ideas to be had, but
Yeah.
I have no problem with the idea of kind of going out with people going, no, don't go. And I
Yeah.
love that idea. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then just on a personal level, right? You are writing the Bizarro Jerry, 1 year after Larry leaves, you're like on the spotlight. The pool guy, you won an award for as well, right? I believe the Writers Guild Award. You're really fresh into this whole thing. And it just obviously it's changed your life. And anyway, so maybe can you remember being your mid-20s, writing for the biggest show, working with these amazing talents,
I mean, it was
basically, and then
incredible.
today it's like a pop culture icon is the show. Like I
No,
just
I
can't
mean,
imagine that.
it was really incredible. I mean, it's everything you think it was. Although what I will say at the same time though is it's not like we were like, dining at Chasen's or something. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? It's not
Mhm.
like, so nobody's life particularly changed. When Larry left the show, as I said, we were working a crazy amount
Yeah,
and we were staying late and we were starting to do things like order dinner in and things that
yeah,
like, Larry was usually very good about like, like I'm going home and the show's,
yeah,
we go, whatever. So I guess on the one hand, I will simply say it was incredible. Obviously, there was a thing that I can't describe except to say I would go to a movie on Friday night and I would be waiting in line to buy my ticket and I could hear people talking about
yeah,
last night's
yeah,
episode of Seinfeld.
yeah,
So nothing
yeah,
equals that. People started, business like job opportunities and things like came a calling. That was incredible too.
yeah,
But it's not like oh my God, like all of a sudden, we were, whatever, like living at like I bought a mansion or like, I don't
yeah,
know, like
yeah,
life didn't really change, but
yeah.
yes, it was incredible.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And then researching for this our podcast together, I find like things I've watched. I always think are funny, And I never thought that they would be connected by you of all, you know. I guess the Seinfeld sense of humor and then the show, the feeling is just my thing. I love it. So one of the show, like I remember when American Pie came out, right? There was a lot of those movies, those teen movies where they're
Yeah.
very funny and very humorous, and then
Yep.
they're kind of gross kind of
Yeah.
comedy. I thought it was good, you know. Seeing the guy have sex with the pie is quite funny. But the one of those kind of genre films that I love was, of course, Eurotrip. When I watched this movie,
God bless you,
it
Casey.
is
God bless you. Let's
hilariously
just do
funny.
5 hours tonight because,
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
God
great.
bless you.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, Eurotrip. Um, I don't know how. I don't know how. So maybe just talk a little bit about how does that movie come out? How do you get involved? You bring like all the Seinfeld writers come together. You're directing, you're producing, you're writing this movie. How did that happen? I mean, obviously
I
from
mean,
Seinfeld, but
I'll give you the crazy long story and, feel free to edit it out. The honest answer was, Seinfeld ended, and I think very, very much, reasonably so. I think we all hoped and thought like, okay, now we're going to go and write our own show and we're
yeah,
going to
yeah,
make our own show. And the truth was, I think almost every writer at Seinfeld, when the show ended, was signed to some sort of what they call a development deal with a production company. Basically, here's a bunch of money. We want you to write pilots for us. And I think in the whatever 3 or 4 year post Seinfeld period under these deals, Peter Melman did a couple of seasons of It's Like You Know. A couple of guys tried to do that Michael Richards show that
yeah,
nobody particularly enjoyed.
yeah,
Um, I did 2 episodes of the Clerks cartoon, and the rest of us had a big pile of pilots that never went anywhere. And so there was this interesting thing where, in a weird way, we had been spoiled by Larry and Jerry. We'd been sort of spoiled by working on a show that the only goal was being funny. And Larry didn't listen to network and they didn't listen to notes, and that's how we were taught. And Larry said no to things that were stupid and told them they were stupid. And I'm not saying we were rude, but all of a sudden we were in a situation where people were lecturing us what Seinfeld was, and then like basically telling you, I think they should hug at the end of this scene. I mean, that's a silly version of it, but I'll never forget. And again, this wasn't a Seinfeld writer, but a writer friend of mine. I went to the taping of the British. They did an American version of the British show Men Behaving Badly,
yes,
and I remember shooting the pilot because a friend of mine was working on it. At the end of the episode, like Rob Schneider falls asleep on the couch, and Ron Eldard, and these are the Men Behaving Badly, covers him with a blanket. And there is nothing fucking behaving badly about that. And yet, that I'm sure there were, executives somewhere masturbating to that imagery. You know what I mean? Of, oh, it's so great. They're really friends and they covered each other. Again,
oh,
fuck that.
yeah,
So what ended up happening, long story short now, is we all kind of went full blast into television. We were paid really good money, and then nothing happened. That's the honest answer. And
yeah,
somewhere in the middle of that, and it was frustrating. It was creatively frustrating to write pilots that go nowhere, to be given, told things that you disagree with, whatever. And yet, oddly, somewhere in the middle of that, movie people started reaching out for rewrites on scripts where they just wanted like some of that Seinfeld humor, for
mm,
lack of a better word.
mm,
And so somewhere in those TV deals, Jeff Alec and I on the side started doing punch ups. Like basically we would
mhm,
just take a movie and just go through it top to bottom and try and put some jokes in. And then we started, restructuring them a little more. And then we were getting like, and all of a sudden we were making this sort of other living in the movie industry that actually seemed to value us for what we were doing, even though the TV industry that had taught us to do it didn't value it, which is a very
interesting,
funny, odd thing.
interesting,
And so somewhere in there, obviously you do a bunch of rewrites, but you start to want to do an original. And we
yeah,
had this idea that we wanted to direct. And actually we were, and look, I'm not going to lie, we analyzed the market. And at the time, those American Pie movies had existed. We had actually talked to some people, I think at one point about the second one a little bit. And I remember in two pieces of it, which was we were given an early draft of American Pie 2. And I remember reading, and it was about going to the lake and becoming house painters. And I remember having the discussion of, that doesn't feel like that's not I think of like high school people like going on like the summer before college trip to Europe or a
Yeah.
teen tour or that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember saying that, and of course they were just like, no, it's this house painting thing. And again, what do I know? They're right, I'm wrong. Although again, I think that movie, sort of just is, but
Yeah.
okay, it's fine and good. There's funny stuff in it, certainly. Lord knows there's funny stuff. I just certainly didn't relate to going to the lake, but again, maybe that's my New York upbringing, and so be it. And again, not the point of the story. So I remember having this concept of like going to Europe. That was an idea, and then we worked on another movie. This ski patrol movie. I can't remember what it was called. Downhill something or other. And I remember at some point or another, there's a hot tub scene, and we pitched out this really fucking funny hot tub idea, and we were like, this is too good. Let's just save this.
Yeah.
And we, again, not knowing where we'll put it, but like,
Yeah.
this is too good to give away to this terrible movie.
Yeah.
And then somewhere out of that, and again, we sort of analyzed the world and went, and we were right but wrong. We were like, we can do our own American Pie. We can write it for a budget, and someone will let us direct it because it will be cheap enough.
Yeah.
We can make this for like $10 million.
Yeah.
And we were right and we were wrong. We were correct, which was we wrote it. It sold at the time. It was a big spec script sale. They
Wow.
agreed. There was multiple bidders. They agreed. Everybody
Wow.
went from like, have you ever directed, to of course you can direct. Everything was right about that. We ended up doing it with Ivan Reitman's company, who just recently passed away. We did it for his production company, Montecito, at DreamWorks.
Yeah.
The downside was it was right all of a sudden, like I think while we were making the damn thing, the world changed, and all of a sudden there were no R movies. And
Yeah.
the notion of little kids or teenagers sneaking into an R-rated movie, it became harder.
Yeah.
And so when the thing came out, and there were a million other things I could talk to you about, the budget ended up being too high, and it should have been made for, if it had been made for the 9 million we set out to do, I think there's a different story to tell. Instead, it kind of was a $20 million movie that barely, again, it became one of those things. And again, I learned a lot doing it, as you do when it doesn't go the way you wanted to. But ultimately, the larger point was nobody saw it in the theater, really. And everybody who saw it on home video when they were 13 years old. And so the movie itself kind of died. People thought it was funny, but it wasn't what we wanted it to be. I don't want to say we were in movie jail, but we weren't able to really, we did other movie work, but we were never able to, at the time, follow it up with another directing gig.
Interesting.
Oddly enough, I think we ended up looping. That's when we actually started doing Curb. We kind of started doing Curb because we needed an office. Larry actually had office space, and we were like, how about we help you with Curb and we get a free office? So that's how Curb started, quite honestly. But anyway, where I was going with this is like, it was what it was. And then, you move the clock forward, and like 15 years later, 10 years later, I shouldn't even say 15 years later, 5 years later, we start hearing that they're playing Sky Doesn't Know at people's proms. And, they're like, again, and again, if you can't be a hit, be a cult hit.
Exactly.
And, that's kind of what it is, which is
Are you
incredible.
friends with Matt Damon? Is that how you got him in there?
We knew Matt. We all went to college together. I don't pretend to have been his best friend. Jeff and Alec knew him a little bit better than me. But let's all be honest about this. He was in Prague, where we were shooting the movie, shooting The Brothers Grimm, which was a movie he made for Terry Gilliam with Heath Ledger. So he was in town.
Okay.
So while it was a favor, and it would, by the way, let me go one step further. It was a giant favor.
Yeah.
But he didn't have to like come to a foreign country.
Yeah.
At least he was in the foreign
You
country.
filmed the high school party, American high school party in Prague?
Yeah, we managed to find a
Wow.
high it was actually the American school in Prague is the high school. It looks kind of American, and we
Amazing.
found a couple of houses with that big backyard that looked like an
Oh
American
my
backyard,
god.
as long as you didn't look in the directions you don't look in. If you
Yeah.
looked in any other direction, it didn't look like America. But right then and there, it was America. But it was really fun. I mean, things that only we remember from making it was like they don't have like the big red cups in Prague,
Yeah.
like the beer cups.
Yeah, yeah. You
So
can
they have
send them in.
kegs, but they have weird little paper things.
Yeah.
So like Jeff Schaefer's mom, I think, sent us like boxes of like the big red
Yeah,
cups
you
so that
need
we could
those. That's
film so that we
that's the
could film an
disguise.
American
Perfect. Yeah.
party. Yeah, exactly. So yes, we did it, but with some help. So we did do it. Yeah.
Did you do an audio commentary for the DVD?
Yes, we actually did two. There's a very normal
Okay.
one, and then there's one on there again if people can
I
even
gotta find
find
it. I'm gonna
DVDs
find it.
anymore.
Yeah.
We actually do one where we play a drinking game, and
Okay.
while we every time I think anybody curses or there's nudity,
Yeah.
I can't remember the rules. It's like we
Yeah.
drink for cursing, and maybe we did a shot for nudity,
Yeah.
and you got to listen to it. I mean, you should find this
I'm
thing because
definitely gonna
we
find it.
get blotto. I mean, we get crazy drunk. It goes off the rails.
Yeah.
At some point, we order pizza in. The pizza guy comes into the session.
Yeah.
At some point, I'm on the phone, like calling my now wife, then girlfriend, like, you have to come pick me up. Like, but this is the commentary is me on a phone saying you need to pick me up. I think our assistant drove Alec home. He didn't know how he got home, where
Oh
his
my
car
god.
was. I mean, I remember waking up in bed at my girlfriend's place. Like, I didn't know how, she took a cab or walked, I don't remember what, and then drove my car back. I mean, it was, but anyway, there's one commentary that's that.
That's
Yeah.
one thing I miss in the world of streaming, right? I don't really buy any
Yeah.
physical media, so I don't hear these. I love hearing director commentaries on films, especially if they're getting drunk while
Well,
doing
I
it.
mean, in
That
some
must be
ways, the
amazing.
podcast is the new director's
Exactly,
commentary.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then okay, and I know this is like we asked a
No,
question
go
about
for it.
Michael
Yeah.
Richards, but it's like Fred Armisen
Yeah.
comes into the scene. I'm looking at the script. I'm thinking of what he said. I'm thinking what you wrote. You wrote like one line,
Yeah. It's
excuse
just that
me in
mi
Italian,
scusi, mi
and
scusi. Yeah.
he delivers it amazing. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that scene? Like he wasn't on SNL yet, was he? Or
No,
was
he
he?
was on SNL.
Okay.
He was relatively new, and we were early buyers on the Fred Armisen market.
Goodbye.
And while he has gone on to millions of things and
Yeah.
wonderful things, I like to think every now and then people still yell. I'm pretty sure they do. I've seen him from time to time, and they still yell "mi scusi" at him. It kind of went like this. The other funny thing about writing that movie, and again, I was talking about, well, no, people go to Europe, even though people do go to Europe, like before college or whatever.
I
I
did that.
didn't.
That's why I connect with
Yeah.
it. I did exactly. I saw that guy. I swear to
Right.
God, that guy
Well,
was real.
that's where I'm going with this is, so I didn't go, Jeff and Alec didn't go. We were all trying to get into college, got into college, like worked summer jobs and then
Yeah.
became comedy writers, so none of us ever like went to college after Europe. Went to Europe after college or anything like that. But we obviously have a lot of friends, and every girl I ever spoke to more or less had a story about more or less being molested on
Yeah.
a train in the middle of the night. Not always an Italian guy, but basically every girl that has ever traveled on a Euro pass
Yeah.
in Europe has been like
Yeah.
at some point has to like scream, turn a light on, or
Yeah.
yell for the conductor
Yeah.
because someone is copping a feel.
Yeah.
And so that was the origin of the creepy Italian guy. And what was funny was Ivan had this idea that he was very dead set on. And I understood it, but it did not work out, which was this idea that we would hire for the different countries people from those countries to play the parts. So the creepy Italian guy would be, I guess, for lack of a better word, an Italian comedy guy.
Yeah.
And obviously we had British people and whatever, but
Yeah.
the truth is
Juggernaut.
Yeah, we tried to find a French robot man. We
Yeah.
couldn't. We ended up with a guy from the Groundlings. We tried to find an asshole French waiter, which was a scene that got cut.
Yeah.
We ended up with a British guy doing an impression of an asshole French guy. It didn't work. It just didn't work. And
Oh,
while I'm sure there were wonderful Italian comics that could have maybe played the part,
yeah.
we either never saw them or they never, it
Yeah.
didn't. And it
Yeah.
was just one of those things. And so, honestly, we cast Fred like on a Friday and he flew on Saturday and shot
Wow.
Monday. I mean, it was one of
Wow.
those. It was the bitter end. And we were all fans and we just kind of rolled the dice that he would be good. I mean, again, we based it on
Yeah.
he's funny on whatever at that point had been one season of SNL, maybe two
Yeah.
seasons,
Yeah.
but certainly not the star of SNL
Sure.
in
Yeah.
any way, shape, or
Exactly.
form yet.
Yeah.
And he came in and he was just fantastic. Just obviously everything you want him to be. And me Scusi. What
Yeah.
else can I say? Yeah.
It's crazy. Now you're telling me the three of you never went to Europe and you wrote
Yeah.
a movie that felt like you had that's what I thought, because I read a part that Larry would just, you guys would pitch your life stories, and Larry
Yes,
and
it's
Jerry
funny.
would kind of say
Seinfeld and Curb are very much life stories,
extrapolate,
but
right?
Eurotrip wasn't. It was it was a lot of other people's stories and us turning them into things. Yeah.
The little kid in the background with the Hitler walk. I was wondering, once you see that scene, I think you're either in for the movie, you're not, because
Yeah.
you're like, what is going on in the background here? Fantastic stuff. It's great that you do have a fond memory of it, and there is like lessons learned out of it. But it's one of my favorite movies. And then you mentioned it before, and I did want to just touch on
Yeah.
it because it's very interesting to me. It's the Clerks animated show. So
Yeah.
you're saying you did Clerks before Eurotrip or
Yeah.
after?
I did basically. I signed when we finished it at Seinfeld. I signed a deal with Touchstone Television, and this is where it gets very complicated. Which is to say, up until I think 1997, and boy, this is going to bore people to death. This is where people just start turning it off. Up until 1997, there was basically a law that said that networks were not allowed to own their own shows. They had to be independent production companies. And that's why Seinfeld, in fact, Larry and Jerry pitched Seinfeld to Rick Ludwin at NBC, who was in charge of late night at the time, and he had a budget to make it. And he then said to them, "You have to go find a production company. We can't just make the show. Someone has to make it for us. We're agreeing to buy it, but someone else has to make it. We can't own it."
Okay.
So they then went to Castle Rock and ended up Castle Rock became the producers of the show, which was the greatest thing that ever happened to Castle Rock, because if NBC had owned it, they would have just owned it.
Yeah.
And if you look back in the late 90s, that was often the big fight, which was to say, the network, after a certain number of years with a hit show, would get very upset that they didn't own the show. Yes, they charged a lot for commercials during the show, which they obviously pocketed.
Yeah.
But then the real money was the syndication, and that was owned by these production companies.
Oh.
So around 1997, after many years of lobbying, the law was changed by, I'm sure, a Republican administration. And so big business triumphed, and all of a sudden the studios were allowed to own their own programming. What that then meant was if I'm ABC, if I'm CBS, if I'm NBC, if you're an independent production company and you have a great show, and I have a production that I'm making and I'm ABC and I have a shitty show, I'm not going to buy your good show. Why would I buy a show from anybody else except put my own shows on?
Yeah.
Unless you're maybe willing to give me half your show.
Yeah.
And you have, that's your decision. You want to basically green mail me for ownership in your show. Yeah. And so if you look, that corresponds right around, again, the end of Seinfeld. And I'm not talking about Friends, which was still on and was a hit. But if you look at the other shows that NBC sort of tried to put on around Friends and whatnot, which they were starting to make a lot of those. And then after that, these other shows, it's when comedy starts to get pretty terrible and stays pretty terrible for a long time until, I guess, really like The Office comes back around. Yeah. Yes, there was still The Simpsons, there were still Friends, there were still shows. Yeah. But basically, this change in the law for a long time ruined television. And really the goal, things broke through later. Again, one man's opinion.
Yeah.
So where am I going with this story?
No, that
So
makes
I
sense.
have a deal with Touchstone, and Touchstone also is owned by Disney, which also now owns ABC,
Yeah.
and they buy Miramax. And I hear through my agent that Kevin Smith wants to do an animated show, and was always a Kevin fan. We shared an agent who had always said to me, "Do you want to meet him? Do you want to meet him?" And I'm not that guy. I don't. I mean,
Yeah.
I did want to meet him, but I didn't want to meet
Yeah.
him just to go,
Sure.
"Hi, I'm a big fan." I want, so when it was like, would you want to be doing this idea? I was like, oh, I'd love to talk to him about that.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work itself out, I got to, I got to meet him. And basically, long story short, I was in New York, went out to New Jersey, very quickly met him and his partner, Scott Mosier, ultimately got to know his whole family. I mean, it was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And we hit it off instantly. And we hit it off not just through like, comedy stuff and movie stuff, but also comic books, honestly. I mean,
Yes.
I can remember just, talking about certain runs of comics, like at this diner that he took me to in Red Bank, and we hit it off there. And then out of that came talking about what the show would be or what the show could be, and we did the show. And again, again, talk about mistakes were made. We had an opportunity to sell it to UPN,
Yeah.
then ABC wanted it. We went with ABC, who at the time was in third place. We start making the show. They were very excited about it. Then all of a sudden they had Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and
Yeah.
then they no longer cared about our
Yeah.
stupid show.
Yeah.
And the truth is, they never understood it. I
Yeah.
think if they'd been in third place, they might have aired it anyway. But once
Yeah.
they were in first place, we went from having an ad on the Super Bowl to basically getting dumped in like June at like 8:30 on Tuesday
With
night.
2 episodes
Yeah,
only.
they aired 2 episodes out of order, and that
Yeah.
was it. And you know, again, partially because of Kevin, certainly, who and the Clerks world, and Kevin has a following, but I'll simply say cool comedy people found it. They found it on
Yeah.
Adult Swim. Obviously,
Yeah.
when we put it out on DVD and whatnot. And again, a little bit of a cult following and a comedy cult following,
Yeah.
because there are some really, really, to this day, some of my favorite things that I've ever been involved with, joke ideas,
Yeah.
like we did an episode where it's a court case, and we're building to the end of the episode, and just as the jury is about to give the verdict, we put up a note on the screen that basically said that the script got lost while it was being sent to Korea for the animation studios, so that now the animators finished it themselves. And the entire back 5 minutes of the episode, it becomes basically an anime show. And it's just this sort of crazy anime show with everybody drawn anime style. And it's just this weird, crazy car chase and whatever. And I mean, it makes, I mean, no, again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. It's just really funny, and no one had done that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it had antecedents in like Looney Tunes and things,
Yeah.
but no one had done that. And I'm as proud of that as anything I've worked on. It's just not quite as well known. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just a matter of timing, and it seemed like, right?
It
Because
was really bad timing,
after
because a couple of
yeah,
years, if we'd been a couple of years later,
later,
like,
yeah.
and we'd been on
Adult
like,
Swim and all that
yes,
stuff took
exactly.
off
We
like
could have been
crazy, that kind
somewhere.
of
If it
comedy,
was the
yeah.
internet now,
Yeah.
again, it was just, we were a little too early, and we were
Early.
wrong. We never should have been on ABC. And it
Yeah.
was and I'd like to tell you, yeah, we were pressured, but we made the decision and we
Yeah,
made it
sure.
wrong. Yeah.
Um, I still know what ABC is. I had to remember what UPN was already. I think about
Yes.
Forger was on that channel, right? That's where it
I
started off.
think that's where it started. Or not all the Star Trek, but the Star Trek, it started there. And then eventually, I think they joined together with the WB maybe,
Something
or they
like that.
folded. I can't remember which. Yeah.
What is the how does the writers' room look for an animated show compared to your live action shows?
Um, Very different, because we did not have much of a budget. So I think the writers' room was me, Kevin, and Scott, and then we had two other writers, two younger guys that I knew that I hired. Kevin, God bless him, had literally never written anything that he hadn't written
Yeah.
himself, and when it was done, it was
Yeah.
done. And so it was all new to him. And I think he was certainly apprehensive, and I was apprehensive in a weird way, where like I'm writing on top of Kevin Smith on his characters, and obviously vice versa too. But that was weird. Again, nothing bad, and it was great, but we were all not unaware of it.
Yeah.
And I've talked to Kevin a little bit about it. I remember him talking, he's talked about this in places, which is when he realized that from our perspective, like we were pitching jokes and there was no ego and it was just, oh, you don't like that one? What about this one?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there
Yeah.
was no possessiveness. And then ultimately it was about just making it funnier. I think again, I don't want to ever put words in his mouth, but that mini writer's room, if you will,
Yeah.
he enjoyed.
Yeah.
But again, very much so, we had these sort of big ideas. We kind of beat them out. Every writer, I think, wrote one. Kevin and I think, did like two of them ourselves. I think there was an Outbreak episode that was part of a script he had written, and then I wrote the back end.
Yeah.
The final one he wrote mostly alone, but then I added stuff on top. So we were, again, it was that sort of idea of writing them somewhat separately, but then coming together to kind of make them better. So yeah, it was great.
I mean, and it's weird how, like, you have actors, the Seinfeld actors, who you can kind of feel that this is just whatever you tell them to say, they're going to say it, and there won't be any kind of, maybe a different kind of delivery because they have the animation they have to, right?
I learned a lot, but we really recorded it unto itself. They weren't recording to the animation, and I really learned a lot because I got to really watch Kevin. He really was the animation voice session director. And even though we weren't shooting it, by the way, I wish we'd filmed all of it, but we didn't. They weren't thinking like that. And obviously there weren't iPhones, like that would have made it easy. But he really, I learned a lot. The stuff I think about to this day, watching him just sort of direct those actors. I remember Crazy James Woods came in as a favor to somebody at Disney. I think the casting person at Disney had done James Woods as Hades in the Hercules cartoon, and so got him to come in and play a general. And I remember he kind of came in and started doing it initially like a general, for lack of a better word. And I remember Kevin basically adjusting him, and in some ways getting him just to kind of go, no. Basically, if James Woods was a general. So it wasn't, don't play the character, kind of just play yourself. And so he kind of like, all of a sudden the guy became like this fast talking East Coast guy, you know what I mean? Who thinks, and it kind of became very James Woods, but it was just very interesting to watch him work with the actor to inhabit the part. That one very literally, but I learned a lot from just those sessions. It was really fun, and we got great people. Got Alec Baldwin and James Woods and all sorts of fun people. But and the original that's the original Seinfeld. The original the original Clerks cast played those roles, and that was really fun getting to know those guys. And to this day, especially like if I'm at a Comic-Con or something, I'll run into like Jay or Brian or something, and exactly. And it's always it's a nice moment,
awesome.
Nice stroll down memory lane.
Then that's another classic thing I recommend if anyone hasn't seen it yet to check out those episodes. That's a great thing about home video, though. You can still get it anytime.
They're out there. They're out there,
streaming somewhere as well. Last question on this TV Hollywood stuff. So you worked with Julia Louis-Dreyfus on Seinfeld. You've taken her to critical acclaim on Veep. Are you the first call that she makes when she gets cast as Valentina Allegra de Fontaine?
Well, I'm not sure I'm supposed to tell this because obviously I don't want to get her in trouble. But I knew she was meeting with them. I don't know, or either I don't know if I knew before. She had talked about in an interview somewhere. She'd said live, like in an interview, she wanted to do a Marvel movie. I don't know if I knew she was going in, but when she went in, she told me she went, or she told me that day she was going. And so I'd heard the meeting was good and all that kind of stuff. And then at some point she got this part. And then at some point there were pages, for some of the early appearances, whatever. And again, I'm sure she signed some sort of NDA and whatever. I'll just simply say, I might have seen the pages and pitched her some jokes and stuff, and then also kind of explained a little bit of who the character was of
Yeah.
Valentina, a little bit.
Yeah.
She'd obviously researched it, but I also kind of explained some stuff to
Yeah.
her. But again, maybe I did all that. But I pitched a couple of things that
That's my
actually
that was
showed
my
up. Yeah.
first question I wrote down for you for this,
Yeah.
because I'm just thinking, oh my god, because when you see her in the Falcon the Winter Soldier, like, oh my, because there's a big cameo in this episode. Who can it be? We don't know. And then it's like, oh my god, it's someone we all love so much from all her roles, and now she's part of the MCU. Is fantastic. Okay, so that's a good segue into like getting into the really nerdy comic book stuff now. So the one of the okay, so you do so many things now. You've done TV, you've done movies, you've animation, you're doing podcasting now, just like Kevin does every week on his show. Your show is called The Stuff Dreams Are Made Of. You have your co-host is also a showrunner of a
Yep.
certain spin-off of a very big TV show that I also love, Game of Thrones. Talk a little bit about what is the show about, and how do you guys come up with this idea? Like, well, I mean, not this idea. Obviously,
the
you're
show. I
fans.
mean, the show. It's interesting. The show is about original movie prop collecting
Yeah.
and sort of all the sort of sundry things that kind of go with that. But what it's funny. It's as we've we're about to. We've done 2 seasons now. We're about to start the third, and really, I don't want to say it's not about prop collecting, because it is about movie prop collecting, but it's as much about collecting. It's very much become about collecting through the lens of original movie prop collecting. But we talk about all kinds of collecting, and we have people on that are collectors of other things sometimes, and we talk about it's really about the mania of collecting, which is very important to us. We are both original movie prop collectors. We met because we are both original movie prop collectors. I think we became initially acquaintances because of original movie prop collecting. I think we became friends because we were both writers that sort of like
Yeah.
recognized, sort of
What a rare
certain
breed! It's
thing.
like the only two of you in
Yeah,
the all of
certain thing
Hollywood.
in each other, and you hit it off for reasons like
Yeah.
that. But it is, again, I am an original movie prop collector. I collect props from movies. I collect art related to the making of movies, like storyboards. I collect movie poster art. I mean, all the different parts of movie making I collect on. Ryan does as well. And so the prop collecting it grew a little bit out of COVID, and it grew a little bit out of we used to get together easily every week, if not
Yeah.
more often. And we'd be like in my living room or his living room talking.
Yeah.
And we kind of moved the talking onto
Yeah,
the
great.
web. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of, you get like our friends that know us sort of often say like, it's like being in your living room for an hour talking about movie props, and you can like it or hate it. But like I said, that's the show. Yeah.
It's fantastic. And you're coming back for a new season in March 10th, right? I think
Yes, March 10th is the premiere of Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, and I think you can even follow it on at original at Prop Podcast at Prop Podcast. I want to say that's right. So you can follow us, but please download it and check it out. I think you'll get a kick out of it if you don't mind.
So wow,
At
you're like my best.
Podcast. Yeah.
You're like my best friend that I don't know, right? Until today, because you love comics, you love all this movie stuff. What's the movie that that gets you? What's the prop that you get that gets you into this? Right? We've talked about what comic got you kind of into comics.
Sure,
and we'll talk about your original art.
It was
Ditko and stuff like that. But what is the first thing you get? You're like, oh my god, I got to get all these things.
A stormtrooper helmet, an actual stormtrooper helmet from Return of the Jedi that I bought in 1996, I think 1996.
Okay.
And
the first Seinfeld royalty check goes to get.
Well,
this
I was
thing.
going to say, the connection beyond obviously the references is, again, I collect a lot of different things. I collect original comic art. We sort of mentioned that once or twice too. I collect these movie props and things, and I'm not going to lie, I built my collection starting during the Seinfeld years where, look, let's be honest, I did 3 years at SNL. I went to Seinfeld when I was like 25 years old. Most people that were my contemporaries were still in law school or
Yeah.
business school or
Yeah.
starting jobs out.
Yeah.
And I was a writer on the number one show
Yeah.
on television, or the number
Yeah.
whatever we were on television.
Yeah.
And I was living in a, I always joke, I was living in a rental house, driving a leased car, and I was working 7 days a week, and all
Mm.
my meals were being paid for.
Yeah.
So I bought comic art. You know what I mean? So I built a lot of the foundations of my collections
Amazing.
during those years when I certainly was sort of maybe a little ahead of where people were in
Yeah.
their life at the time,
Yeah.
but also stuff was a lot cheaper back then too. So,
And you lived in Los
yeah.
Angeles? Would that make it
Yeah,
easier to
there
get
was
to access?
definitely access, not only especially to stuff, but also to like-minded people. I mean, a lot of the collectors that I know to this day, I met who were LA collectors that I think had I been in New York, I don't think the movie prop collecting thing might have happened the same way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was a really cool thing, and I learned, and again, like with all collecting, especially the early years, it's not just about the acquiring, it's about the learning,
Yeah.
learning the stories, the lore,
Yeah.
learning about people, bad
Yeah.
stories, good
Yeah.
stories, where to
Yeah.
find stuff, who to talk to, the hunt, if you will, which
Yeah.
was pretty incredible. So
So
yeah.
yeah. So for
And
me, an
that's
entry.
and then just to sum it all up, that's what the Stuff Dreams Are Made Of is
Yeah.
about. Like that's what we talk about.
That's
Yeah.
great. So I would go to a Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con,
Yep.
and that's where I would see the artists, the
Yep.
writers, the comics, the back issues, and the original art. So where would I go to, like, because that's the thing, right? I've never had experience to see
Well,
this
the
stuff
last
except in a
couple of
museum.
years, there have been prop exhibitors at San Diego Comic Con.
Okay.
A couple of the auction houses would bring stuff out, and
Okay.
then the Prop Store of London, which is now just called the Prop Store, they would set up, usually advertising their upcoming auction. But also with some items to sell, and they set up at like Star Wars shows and stuff. And they'll always have a nice little display of, some incredible high-end items. But one of the things I also love about prop collecting is you could buy a storyboard or a call sheet. You could get a call sheet
Yeah.
from a shooting day of
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi
Yeah.
that was used by somebody that
Sure.
worked on that thing.
Yeah.
And maybe it lists one of your favorite scenes.
Yeah.
That's not an expensive quote unquote prop to
Yeah.
own.
Yeah.
And you can have that little piece. And we always talk about this. And again, this is what I mean, collecting to me is two things. It's nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's a physical
Exactly.
form of
Yeah.
nostalgia. But also it's a way of owning something that is unownable. It's owning a piece of something that like how do you own Star Wars? How do you own The
Yeah.
Godfather?
Yeah.
Unless you
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you can have a t-shirt, you can have the poster on your wall, and
Yeah.
all of those things are part of the ownership.
Yeah.
But for me, and a little bit like in Red Dragon when the guy sort of eats the painting, it's sort of like my way of kind of, owning, that experience of seeing Star Wars when I was 7 years old is having a stormtrooper helmet.
Yeah.
That's the
That's the
expression of
connection makes.
collecting.
And
Yeah.
so you mentioned Star Wars, the Stormtrooper helmet's the first thing.
Yeah.
You also collect the artwork, and you also put out a book about the Ralph McQuarrie art, right?
Yeah, actually, with two very good friends of mine, Brandon Allinger, who actually works at Prop Store or is the president of Prop Store LA or whatever, and he also wrote a wonderful book that I got to kibitz on a little bit, but didn't co-write or anything like that, which was on Star Wars costumes. And our other friend, Wade LaJose, we wrote a book on basically it's Star Wars. The art of Ralph McQuarrie. And
Yeah.
Ralph McQuarrie, for anyone who doesn't know,
Yeah.
was basically the conceptualist that George Lucas hired in the early days of Star Wars, before there was, when there was just sort of a script and whatnot, who really helped create the world of Star Wars, that sort of old space idea. And Wade actually knew Ralph in real life. Wade had been friends with him and knew
Wow.
him. I was a collector and a fan. Brandon was a collector and had written a book before. We kind of came together and did sort of, this really wonderful giant
Beautiful.
2-volume,
Yeah. Beautiful.
25-pound book that basically, like, how does one say, I like to say it's the definitive work.
Definitive. Yeah.
It was the wonderful man who was the editor at Lucasfilm, who unfortunately passed away about a year ago, Jonathan Rinsler, who also, by the way, wrote a bunch of other wonderful making of Star Wars books, but also has done like the Making of Planet of the Apes book, the making of, I think, Alien and
Oh,
Aliens
wow.
books. A
Great.
really wonderful writer and great guy. And he and really helped us with the approach, which was, yes, it's a movie book. Ralph McQuarrie worked in movies,
Yeah.
but we are going to treat him like he is Leonardo da Vinci, and
Yeah.
rightfully so.
Yeah.
And so it is an art book about a guy who happened to make art for the movies.
Yeah.
And we treat it like an art book, and it's everything is in there. It is though I think we found a couple of new pieces in the last couple of years, and hopefully at some point there'll be yet another edition.
Yeah.
I think there've been 2 editions so far. The second time, anytime we find stuff, we add it. But it is the definitive. It is Ralph's Star Wars related art. He did other things, but this is his Star Wars related art of the
How long
3
did it take you to
films.
track down a lot of that artwork? There's stuff I've never
Well,
seen before at all.
luckily, a lot of it is in the Lucasfilm archives, and we
Okay.
spent a wonderful amount of time up there. Um, the archives team up there um, just was so welcoming and wonderful, and really let us,
That's like the
really.
ultimate job, isn't it? The
Oh, it was
archivist of the
incredible.
Star
I mean,
Wars Lucas.
getting to, but I got to tell you, getting to go up there and visit and like stay in the inn at the ranch, and then
Yeah.
basically wake up, have like make a cup of coffee, and then go into the archives
Oh my God.
and photograph and catalog and
Yeah.
resort this stuff was just incredible. And so a big chunk of it was that, and then the 3 of us as Macquarie collectors, original prop collectors with a network of people, we dug and got, copies and scans of pieces in private collections. And so really it was the first time these 2 things had come together, because
Amazing.
Lucasfilm didn't really necessarily have access to the private collections. And obviously most private collectors don't have access to Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
And so the book, like I said, it is the what did they call it, like raison catalog or
Yeah,
catalog de
sure.
raison,
Yeah.
of Ralph McQuarrie art. And
I
it is available on Amazon, so please. Yeah.
So you obviously obviously you're a huge fan. There's no way you wouldn't make this book if you weren't a huge fan. I'm a huge fan. I find his designs were better than what actually came out. Personally, I would have loved to see a Star Wars with those more harsh looking. I don't know if they're
I
harsh
agree.
is
I
the word.
agree. I mean, I think some of it was, look, again, it's a wonderful thing. And again, I have, again, I wasn't there. I think, the bringing of something from design to reality, certainly in 1976, is obviously
True.
much harder than it
True.
is to do today. There are some wonderful designs. I think one of the nice things that the current Star Wars stuff is doing is they are rating some of the unused designs, and they are carrying some of that Ralph influence into some of the TV shows and stuff that
Yeah,
they've been
that's right.
doing.
Yeah.
I have no problem with what he did. I mean, I think the team that George Lucas put together, that was Ralph, and then I think especially Ralph and Joe Johnston, who is the other guy I'd love to do a book on,
Yeah.
who obviously has become a wonderful director in his own
Yeah.
right. But the stuff that those guys did to make Star Wars with, they were what's the word? They were the tools that
Yeah.
George used to
Yeah.
make Star Wars in just an incredible way. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get to meet Ralph McQuarrie?
I sadly didn't either. I missed an opportunity through Wade, who, like I said, did know him. And then the next thing I knew, he had passed away,
Yeah.
and I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
By the way, sort of a vaguely similar thing with like a possible chance to have once met Jack Kirby and then didn't, and then
Yeah.
regretted it. It is what it is. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's a great segue into the next section. Now let's get into the comics. So we connected because we both know Felix Liu,
Yep.
who runs the Felix Comic Art. He's a comic art dealer for original comic art. And there's all these stories. You're like a legend in the comic book original art business. This is all the stuff we've talked about. I'm a fan of, but comics is like my thing, and that's what this podcast is about. Just about talk about comics and the creativity around it. And so I want to kind of talk to you about your collection.
Sure.
And this whole David Cho story that came out, I'm sure you were like, wow, there's a lot of, I just had dinner with this guy and it's like reverberated into all these, it's become a legendary dinner now.
Well,
But
legendary to a very tiny group of
sure,
people, but
sure,
go
sure. But
on. Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
that's our people. That's our people. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
excited about. But I wanted to. So you told me earlier on that you grew up with X-Men, John Byrne, Claremont stuff. But you're a huge Ditko fan, and I think you
Yeah.
have the whole. I read somewhere you have the entire Spider-Man 26. It's
Yep.
one of the things you have. You have some kind of sofa made out of Ditko art, things
I
like that.
have
Tell me, what does Ditko mean to you?
Boy, what does Ditko mean to me? That's an excellent question that I am stalling by telling you it's an excellent question. Well, look, again, obviously there's a part of it is the nostalgia. That
Yeah,
is my Spider-Man. I mean,
yeah,
again, those are the first Spider-Man stories I read. They are the ones that are, like, again, seared into my soul. The cartoon was very much Ditko-esque, even if
yeah,
it wasn't
yeah,
perfectly Ditko.
yeah,
So that is also a part of me, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
yeah,
that. So those are like the fundamental building blocks of like comics in general for me. And so it's definitely that as a part of it. But the other thing about it is there is both, you were talking about Macquarie a little bit. When you look especially like at the early Ditko, like the sort of the rougher pre-brush period,
mm,
there's something wonderfully horrible about the stuff he's drawing. Peter Parker is a horrible nerd. A lot of the villains are not just they're not beautiful villains. They're
totally
thuggy
agree.
and they're
Yeah,
horrible. And there
yeah,
is a horror to a lot of
yeah,
Peter Parker's world
yeah,
and these villains.
yeah,
And yet at the same time, especially as he goes and as Ditko gains confidence, it's this that gets mixed with this beautiful elegance. I
yeah,
mean, he begins to use the brush, which changes a little bit of how these people look, but they are still these creatures. But the storytelling becomes so cinematic, and I can't explain it. It was just I was so it's almost as much I equate Ditko with the form of comics
yeah.
themselves. For me, it's
Wow.
just like they're
Yeah,
inseparable. And it's
yeah,
that mix of the elegance and the horror and the everyday and the spectacular. And I
yeah,
don't know how else to say it. That
yeah,
just, he's the guy.
yeah. Do you have any pre-Spider-Man work from
I
Ditko?
do. I love those pre-hero stories.
Yeah. He's drawing a
I,
lot of
I,
monsters and stuff back then, right?
Yeah, they're always those, funny kind of twist ending
Yeah,
stories and
yeah,
whatnot. And the work on those is just gorgeous, especially some of them that later on when he did the Warren stuff, where he does where he's doing kind of more of like a what's the word I'm looking for, like a watercolor kind of a thing.
yeah,
But so many of those pre-hero stories, even though they were printed in color, so many of the stories are often like these like good versus evil, shadow versus light kind of things. And those originals, the way he uses the white and the blacks,
yeah, yeah.
just
Very good.
incredible, incredible stuff. And
Yeah,
nobody draws hands like Steve Ditko.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How do you get into collecting comic art? I mean, you're in Hollywood, so it's easier to get a Stormtrooper helmet than maybe a Steve Ditko original, which he's based in New York or whatever, right?
Well,
It's
it's funny. I was so let's loop back to I'm buying comics and I'm the guy. I'm going every week to my comic book store. And on certain days I'm going to check out the other comic book stores in town,
yeah,
and on other days, if I'm walking on Broadway, there's the 79th Street newsstand that gets certain comics, and maybe there's the 72nd Street newsstand where maybe I'm looking, did I miss something? You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Even though I have my pull, this
Nice,
is comics are my life. You know
nice.
what I mean? I love
Yeah,
comic books. And oddly enough, I'm shopping at shops that it turns out years later I found out like they were dealing comic art in the back. I just never got invited
yeah,
back there. They didn't have any on the walls. I didn't know. So I went easily, gosh, 22, 23 years before I ever saw or knew about comic art. I was a
yeah,
huge comic fan.
yeah,
I had my comics, I had my collection. I wasn't a big back issue buyer because I just
yeah,
didn't have the money.
yeah,
So it's not like I ever had like Action One or anything crazy
yeah,
like that. But
yeah,
I had little runs of things that I loved or things that I would discover, or I would go like, oh wow, like I didn't realize Claremont and Byrne worked on Iron Fist.
Yeah,
Like I'm gonna
right.
get every appearance of Iron Fist because
Yeah.
again, there was no online buying. There weren't a lot of
Yeah.
trade paperbacks of these things, and so I was very into the comics and. I loved it. And I remember things like going over to Europe and finding like different trade paperbacks that weren't available in America. And
Yeah.
again, I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
I was very into it. But it wasn't until I think when I was at SNL, when I was at Saturday Night Live, I went to there was a big snowstorm, and I went to a Javits Center show. I think it was at the Javits Center that was very unattended because the snowstorm killed the
Uh-huh.
show.
Uh-huh.
And I think I saw my first couple of pieces of comic art there, and I think I bought like a hand colored something of like the X-Men, but it wasn't an original. It was like somebody had like
Yeah.
colored in a
Sure.
copy, like from Artist Alley. But it was the kind of thing you could put on your wall for like $15, whatever. But at least that was the first time I think I knew comic art existed, but not really.
Yeah.
So the real answer is it's because of the San Diego Comic Con. I moved to LA. I'm working at Seinfeld. I went down to my first San Diego Comic Con on a Saturday because I was working Monday through Friday,
Yeah.
but it was my first summer in LA. I
What year was
drove
that? Do you
down.
remember?
That would have been, let's see, 92, 93, 93, 94,
After
94,
Image.
95. It would have been 95. It would have
Okay.
been the, whatever, July, I guess, of 95. And again, it was a different world. And, I got in my car. I drove down to San Diego.
Yeah.
I parked a couple of blocks from the convention. I walked up to the front of the convention. I bought a ticket to go in. There were,
You
like,
can't do
I
that
waited.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, waited in a tiny, not much of a line. I
Yeah.
went in. At the end of the day, I was like, oh, this was so much fun. I decided to stay the night. So I walked over to the Marriott and booked a room and then
Wow.
got my car and parked it at the Marriott and then went back the next day, bought a ticket and went in on Sunday.
Wow.
And at that show, what I really remember, what my real mission was, and again, I'd been at SNL for 3 years and now I was at Seinfeld. And so I had a little bit of money in my pocket, and what I did at that first show is I bought all the back issues of X-Men that I didn't own,
Okay.
including my first copy ever of Giant Size X-Men 1,
Nice.
which was the book that I could never afford.
Yes.
That's the honest answer.
Yes.
And I went, I bought all those books, and I started peeking around things like, oh, Star Wars action figures, mint on the card, I started to kind of look into that, whatever. And I bumped into comic art, and I believe I saw some stuff, and I think I bought a piece. I think from Matt Wagner, which was a piece of Batman art from the Legends of the Dark Knight story, the Two-Face story he did, that was very Matt Wagner, but also had a heavy Toth influence to it about the circus freaks. And I bought a really cool page, and I think I signed up for Matt's like fan club or something like that. But and I remember there was a Dark Knight piece that I asked a question about, and I was treated very rudely because I was like, how much is that?
You're
And
like
I
a
think
kid, right?
they said 5, and I said 5 what? Because I literally didn't know, and they were really nasty to me. It was a guy who worked for Danzig, and so that was my first experience. But I did buy my first piece. And off of that, I think I had gotten a card from a guy, I think from Tom Horvitz, who was a local LA guy. So I started to like poke around, and then there was a show in New York, and I met more people. I went to, I was home in New York visiting my folks. There was another show, and I went there, and then I remember this must have been that like May that I made it through July of 95, I go to my first San Diego. Maybe I go to a show in between, and then I come to New York because we go to New York with Jerry. We spend a couple of days in New York kind of like looking for story ideas. Like when Larry left the show, that was Jerry had us
that's
all
interesting.
Yeah, we all flew to New York and kind of hung out and kind of like looked for stories, and it happened. It was really fun and interesting. It was great. Yeah. And we went to the actual Soup Nazi also with Jerry, which was really funny. Yeah.
Because that's the story he always mentions about how it came to be, right? It was him and Larry making fun of food in a Korean convenience store or something, right? And so That's funny.
It was that, but it was, it was a real guy that, the guy that wrote the episode, it was a Letterman writer, Spike Feresten, and that was a place all the Letterman guys went to, and all the Letterman guys, they called him the Soup Nazi, and so he pitched that to Larry and Jerry, and
Wow.
I think that's why they understood it. So anyway, we all went with Jerry and got in line, and got to the front of the line. I remember Jerry like took his like hat off or something. It was like, "Hi, Al," and boy, the guy was just like shocked and not happy to see Jerry, but gave us soup, and it was delicious. We went to like the park and ate it like on a, I think we ate it like outside on like benches or
Oh
bleachers or
my
something in Central
god.
Park. It was great. It was really good. Um,
Amazing.
but anyway, somewhere in there, I think I met some other people, and then I was back again around Christmas. We did another New York trip, and I remember one of the dealers I met kind of came to my hotel room
Uh-huh.
and brought some stuff, and I
Oh,
made like my first big purchase of like a Dark Knight piece and a
wow.
Watchmen piece and whatever,
Wow. Wow.
and I was hooked. I
Yeah.
was just hooked, and from then on, it was sort of like, yes, San Diego, but also, and again, dating myself, we were working, like I said, 7 days a week. And so I would be in the writer's room, and we'd take a break. And so I would go to my office, and there, when I would get to my office, pinned to my door, I had this little thing on my door that was like a little like narrow corkboard thing for like memos and messages. And there would always be something faxed from like a comic art dealer, and there'd be a picture of like, oh, here's a Kevin Maguire Justice League piece,
Yeah.
whatever. And I would pull down the fax, I'd look through it all, I'd get on the phone, I'd call up whoever, I'd call Mitch Itkowitz at Graphic Collectibles, and I'd go,
Wow.
I'll take it. And
Wow.
usually, I think by then he had my credit card on file, and I would just go, I'll take it. And then it got shipped to me. Again, I was at work, and I was
Yeah.
just buying, and then stuff was showing up, and it was
Wow.
great. But the difference was you could go to San Diego, and I'd spend $5,000, which again is not an insignificant amount of money. But
Yeah.
for me, $5,000 at the time was not a lot.
Uh-huh.
And you'd get a pile of art
Yeah.
like 7 inches like of
Yeah.
art. Like I
Amazing.
can't explain it. Like,
Yeah.
so that is where I built the backbone of even my collection today. Yeah.
That's amazing. So in 25 years ago, you could acquire Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen pages, which are only 10 years old at that point too,
Yeah.
right? It's not even that old at that
Oh
point.
yeah.
And from just dealers that just had random pages there. Nobody has complete.
Oh
You
no.
have the covers for all the Dark Knight Returns. Is that correct?
No, no,
Oh,
no,
oh,
no, 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 no,
no,
no, no. I do not. I
no.
wish I did, but I do not. Yeah.
But
Got some. I've got some.
you have some of the covers and some of the interiors of that.
I have a lot of interiors.
Oh wow, wow, wow. So is the Dark Knight Returns a a piece of your like history? Like
Yeah, I
you
mean,
relate to that a lot?
again, it's again 1986. I was 16, and
Yeah,
again, obviously 86 is the summer of obviously Watchmen and
yeah,
Dark Knight, and I was a huge comic fan. There are incredible comics from before that, and there are incredible comics that came after it. But those two comics were earth shattering
yeah,
in that kind of
yeah,
form defining way that,
yeah,
and again, as comics, but also just as storytelling. I mean,
yeah,
just the idea of like deconstructing, which was something I, came to learn in college.
yeah,
I really learned from Alan Moore and
yeah,
Frank Miller to some
yeah,
extent. You know what
yeah,
I mean? It's
yeah.
just like, so, again, they transcended comics as far as I was concerned. I always thought, like, obviously, I think Steve Ditko transcends comics, but these were things I felt like I was reading literature.
Yeah.
They were earth shattering. So yeah, those were huge for me. But so are a lot of books that no one else likes either. So,
Yeah.
I'll get, give me those too.
So you're able to acquire these Ditko Spider-Man pages in 95, I guess 95,
Yeah.
96, alongside these Dark Knight Returns and
Oh
Watchmen
yeah.
pages.
I mean, I
Wow.
think like, back
Like today
then,
you couldn't find those. You
like,
couldn't go to
I think
San
like
Diego and find these,
A
right?
Ditko page at the time was like, I want to say it was like I think I bought two. The first time I bought Ditko, I bought 2 pages of Ditko, and I think I got the 2 pages for like $3,000 or
Yeah.
$3,100.
Okay.
And I think either of those pages would, needless to say, sell for a lot more.
Yeah,
And I'll leave
sure.
that at that. But yeah,
We've all been watching the heritage auctions, right? So
yeah,
we know that the market's gone absolutely bonkers in that original art world. So that's amazing. But it's good. Like you obviously are a fan and a collector, and you have an emotional attachment to it, just like a lot of collectors like we do for comics or for comic art,
Yeah,
right?
I can't swear to you that some of the prices that we're seeing right now, anybody that some of the people have the same emotional connection.
I agree. I
I
agree.
think
Yeah.
right now we're seeing a lot of, weird speculation and whatnot, as we're
Yeah.
seeing in all the different collectibles and
Yeah.
hobbies. And obviously, there's a lot of loose money and crypto and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
that's what people are doing with their money. And we're seeing it in all collectible
Yeah.
fields.
That's true.
But it has come to comic art in a big way in the last
That's what my
couple of
podcast
years.
with
Yeah.
Felix was about. We're talking about the Secret Wars 8 page that went
Yeah.
for $3 million. Wasn't even the first appearance of Spider-Man
No, it's
in
not
that
even the second
costume.
appearance. It's not even the 10th appearance. It
I
was
know.
nuts
I
though.
was just
Yeah.
looking at CGC books and finding out that there's an Amazing Heroes. The magazine, the news magazine, is worth something like $1,000 because it's the first sketches from that Rick Leonardi did that showed up in Marvel Age, but it was the first ones in black and white. That one is, some collectors are considering that the first appearance, and I was like, "Whoa, that's
Yeah.
we're dipping really deep into these wells of speculation, right?"
It's just it's exhausting. I will simply say I'm not a fan of it. I don't I honestly, part of me just doesn't get it, and maybe
Yeah,
it is generational to some extent. The
yeah,
the the collectors that seem to be going after that stuff, these quote unquote first appearances, definitely seem to be of a younger generation. And
yeah,
I certainly understand. I meet younger people all the time, like, my Ryan Condal, who I co-host Stuff Dreams Are Made Of. Like, like with Spider-Man, and I don't know where you fall. How old are you? How old did you say you were?
I'm 5 years younger than you.
5 years younger. Okay. So you're probably right on the borderline, but I bet whatever, which is like, I don't give a shit about Venom. It's
Yeah,
fine, but I
yeah,
don't fucking care.
yeah,
He's a bunch younger than me. He
yeah,
fucking loves
yeah,
Venom, as
yeah,
do a lot of people. It's
yeah,
a dividing line
yeah.
of
It is.
age.
Agreed.
So
Yeah,
part of it is, I would never spend crazy money on a Venom page to begin with. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But so I understand Venom is other people's Dark Knight. I
yeah,
get that.
yeah.
So that's part of it. But I do think the obsession with first appearances, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And also the hype with the film as well, though, right? That movie did
No, I'm
a
sure that's part of
crazy,
it. I'm
right?
sure that's part of it. Yeah.
What are some of the more unique, maybe unique pages that you have, that maybe are unique to you? Because I was talking to Felix, like, I love GI Joe, like I love GI Joe.
Sure.
That GI Joe 21 cover, I was like, whoa! And then he was saying that one of his buddies has the whole interiors for that issue, which
Yes.
is even more crazy to me. I can imagine one guy
Yeah.
has all that, and there's a picture he put on his Instagram where it's just all laid out in a bed. I was like, oh my god, that's amazing.
Yeah. Very,
Not
very
everybody
jealous
thinks
of
that
that.
that's hot
Well, no,
art
but like
or
with GI
whatever. Right?
Joe, for example, I'll give you a great example. I have the cover to GI Joe 2, which is the
Yeah,
Quinn cover.
wow, the Eskimo ones.
And
Yeah,
yep,
yeah,
exactly. And again, I'm not saying this, I'm not a comic collector. I love that story. Like
yeah,
when they made some action figures a couple of years ago for the
yeah,
first time, I
yeah,
bought those action figures. And
yeah.
then Super 7 just announced a new Quinn action figure. I'm
Yes,
buying that too.
yes, yes.
I love that story.
Yeah,
I have never forgotten the way that ends, where he basically is going, they're 2 miles away,
yeah,
but whatever, and you see them coming at
yeah,
you, and Snake Eyes is wearing the totem on it.
yeah,
I love that story. I mean, I
yeah.
would buy that story complete if I could, but I own that cover. And it was also,
Wow.
again, this is one of those things at the time, GI Joe 1 was big because it was a number 1, and then nobody ordered issue
2,
2
yeah, yeah,
because it was an
yeah,
issue 2.
yeah,
And then when they realized they had a hit, people
yeah,
started ordering 3 and 4. So
yeah,
2 was always the issue when I was a kid. And again, I wasn't a huge comic, I was a collector of, I had all my comics, but I didn't like buy and sell comics.
yeah,
But I remember watching in the store, like as like 2 went like $2 and $3. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So
I
2
remember that
was
too.
always that special comic, whatever. Oh,
Oh, geez, my watch just went off. Yeah, that I know. So wow, that you have
so
that
like
page.
that's an example that I love. I
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that not everybody would also
No,
say, "Wow,
no.
I love Quinn. He was the best." I'm so amazed that you brought that up because I just got that Super 7, a little action figure. I'm like, "Holy crap, they made the Quinn
Yeah.
character." They're also coming out with Super 7's coming out with, I don't know if you remember the cartoon series, but the first mini series was called The Mass Device, and Snake Eyes get something, and he turns all radioactive and he passes out in the snow, and some blind guy saves him, and
Oh,
it's like
like the hermity guy kind of. Yeah, yeah.
that's an action figure set. The
Yeah.
hermit guy, his wolves, and a radioactive Snake Eyes is a toy, and I was like, I got to get that. That
Yeah,
is
I
when I
mean,
saw, it, I
if
was like,
look,
you immediately remember that. You immediately remember
no,
that
if
idea.
Super 7 is smart, the next shit they'll be making will be Hard Master and Soft Master, and
Oh,
I am
yes.
there. I
Oh my
am
God.
there.
That would
Yes.
be amazing. Oh, David. Oh my God. This is amazing. What a discussion. There's such a deep cuts into this thing. So how do you nowadays, so with so much competition in original art, how do you continue your collection? Are you still, obviously you talk to people like Felix and other original art dealers.
I mean, and you and Felix, I think, talked a lot about this. Obviously, Felix talks a lot about Felix is a representative for new artists as
Yeah.
opposed to a guy that deals in old art and whatnot. And I fall into the category of somebody I still. Well, I haven't actually been inside the comic store in 2 years, but
Yeah.
I get my comics picked up for me
Yeah.
every week.
Yeah.
I read new comics every week. And so I'm constantly reading stuff I love and seeing new artists and things that I love. And so to some extent, I'm buying those guys. I'm buying, I
The
guess
new
the
guys. Yeah.
majority of my purchases are new things that I really love. And I don't go into it haphazardly. It takes a while before I decide like I'm going to get someone or like someone or
Hmm.
add someone.
Hmm.
I want to love it. I don't want to be looking at it a year from now and go, why did I buy it? You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and sometimes I want an example and I'm done. And sometimes there are guys where I go, oh no, I got to have more of that or things like that. And some guys, there are some books, like, for example, a couple of years ago, I don't know if you read, did you read the Tom King, Walta Vision miniseries?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I love that book. I just, again, just a great piece of writing
Yep.
and
Yep.
gorgeous art.
Go. Yep.
And I eventually kind of got to track down Walter on like Facebook and kind of started a little relationship with him and was able to kind of go and bid on some stuff that he put in auction, and then was just like, please, can I buy some stuff? And at some point he like let me he doesn't have a lot left, but he showed me a couple pieces and I was just like, oh, I'll take these. And so that's an
Wow.
example where he didn't do the covers, but to me, that is about the interior
Yeah.
storytelling and
Yeah.
him as an artist as much as the writing.
Yeah.
And so I bought pages, and I'll buy, what I get from different people is how I feel about the project. Sometimes
Yeah.
it is a cover, sometimes it's pages. So look, the answer is if that fills a lot of it. The other thing is look, I know a lot of collectors and there's a lot less of it now, but sometimes people break things out from their collection and give
Yeah.
me an opportunity to get it. And
Yeah.
sometimes I can trade something. And sometimes, even if I'm offered something that is a crazy price, if I think the crazy price is valid, and some
Yeah.
crazy prices I do think are valid and some I don't, and there you can call me a hypocrite if you like. Like, why would you spend, whatever, 100x on this,
Yeah.
but you don't think this is 100x?
Yeah.
Well, again, that's where it becomes personal choice.
Yeah.
But I am lucky enough that I have pieces in my collection that I'm, 20 deep on, so that if I want to break one of those off that is also now valued at a lot and trade it to somebody for something else,
Yeah.
I can do that,
Yeah.
or put a piece, give a piece to an auction house or any of these things. I'm lucky enough to have a collection that I can de-ascension to acquire new
Yeah.
big pieces. But
Good.
the real truth is, we are now mostly talking about one big piece, maybe a year, and maybe
Yeah.
sometimes not, because
Yeah.
the prices are so crazy.
Are so crazy.
And as the prices have gotten crazy, my criteria for what I think is worth it and what I think I really need, because look, let's be honest. If I never got another piece of comic art, while I would be sad,
Mhm.
I'll be fine, and
Yeah.
I'm very happy with my collection. I'm beyond thrilled with my collection. I own things I never thought I would own,
Yeah.
from some of my favorite stories, both important and unimportant.
Yeah.
I love my collection. I could look at it 24 hours a day if I could.
Yeah.
So that being said, I don't need to acquire anything, but there are still things on my list that I'd love to find. Again,
Yeah.
both big and small.
Yeah.
But when big things do come up, I'm not going to lie. There are things that have come up in the last 3 or 4 years where I've bid, and when the bidding went past me,
Yeah.
I just went,
Let
well,
it
oh
go.
well,
Yeah.
that ship has sailed. And
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm sad, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about that
Yeah.
list, can we, a little bit? Because I'd like to know what are some of the pieces that have eluded you over these last 25 years of collecting
Well,
that
like
you're like,
things
I
I'm
really want this?
still looking for, or are you talking about the things I was outbid on?
No, there's things you're still looking for. You don't have
Okay.
to be, don't
I
have to be
mean,
specific. It
yeah,
can
yeah.
just be in
I'll
general.
be specific. I'll be super specific. I mean, look,
Okay.
there's certain. I mean, look, there's certain things, which is, again, there's things I can put on a list, and I'll start by saying like I have a lot of them. I have a bunch,
Yeah.
but I love the early. I mean, again, we talked about Star Wars. I love the Marvel Star Wars stuff.
Okay.
The early Marvel Star Wars comics. I love
The
any of
Chaykin
the
ones.
yeah, I love all those Chaykin and
He
various
hates them.
inkers. I know he hates them, but I love them. So I love especially the first 6, the
Yep.
adaptation, if you
Yep.
will. But
Yep.
really, any of the first 25 covers are interesting to
Yep.
me. I mean,
Yep.
as a kid,
Yeah.
when Star Wars continued, that was it for me.
Yeah.
And certainly the Star Wars 7, which was the Han and Chewie, the first new standalone. I'll buy pages. If I ever saw that cover, I'll go to the wall for that sucker,
Oh, wow.
if and when that
Interesting.
shows up.
Interesting.
So that's an example of something I have examples of I'd like more.
Yeah.
And something I would love to get that I don't have. And I probably had an opportunity and missed out because at the time, and it's interesting. I've always been early on in my collecting, I bought a lot of things, and then as years went by, I realized, oh, that wasn't the one I really wanted, and I let it go because you could. If you
Yeah.
bought an interior page,
Yeah.
again, for $50, and then a year later you realized you didn't want it, and you sold it, and you got $50 or $60, and
Yeah.
then you found the page you wanted. It was no harm, no foul. It's not
Yeah.
like, oh, I bought something for $100,000 and I realized I didn't like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
obviously would be stupid.
Yeah.
So once upon a time, obviously, I just would like, oh, look, here's a page. I'll buy this. And then, you start to go, oh, it's a nice page, but the issue I really want is
Yeah.
this, or the
Yeah.
storyline I want is this,
Yeah.
or, oh, I really want it when that other artist was on, again, whatever that is. So you learn those lessons early on. So somewhere along the line, I never quite found the right one, which is definitely a thing that happens. So I would love to get a really good Dennis Cowan question cover from
Okay.
the Dennis
Yeah.
Cowan, Denny O'Neil
Yeah.
run
Yeah.
of the question.
Yeah.
Preferably maybe inked by Bill Sienkiewicz, maybe not,
Yeah.
but a really good one. I love that's a comic I really love, loved, past tense, present
Yeah.
tense, whatever you like. I would love to get one. The end. Yeah.
That's the, you have a new chance, right? I think they're doing it again together right
I
now.
know they have, and it's really nice, and it was good. And I actually liked it. It was written by Jeff Lemire. I don't know if that's how
Yeah.
he pronounces his name,
Yeah.
but and I enjoyed it. I don't know if it was enough to buy it. Like I didn't
Yeah.
love. I liked the story a lot, but
Yeah.
I want the stories I read. That's what
Sure,
I
sure.
want. Yeah.
Do you ever get commissions from your favorite artists? Do you like to buy
Yes
their
and
kind of art?
no. I don't do a lot of free form commissions because the truth is, you just like. It's funny. I'll tell you a funny story recently. Um, because of the last batch of COVID, the Omicron. Um, I think Arthur Adams ended up canceling an appearance at a New Orleans convention. But instead, he basically put his sketch list onto Instagram where
Yeah,
you could
I saw that.
jump
Yeah.
on his
Yeah.
list and get one. I've known Arthur and his wife Joyce. I've known them for years. If we were at a show together, we have dinner together. They are good friends. Our children have played together. I love them to death. I have a crap load of Arthur's art. I have Joyce art. I love them both. I don't know what possessed me, but I was sitting I happened to be home, and I was like on Instagram, and I was like, fuck it, and I did it right on the dot, and I
Nice.
got one of them.
Nice.
And right before I did it, it was like I had to figure out what the hell to ask him to draw.
Mhm.
And I'm a huge fan, and I have wonderful things, and I could think of a million things he could draw. But when you actually got down to what did I want him to draw for me, I was just like, I don't fucking know. And at the
Yeah,
last
yeah,
second, I thought of a good one, which was Chewbacca. And he did an incredible Chewbacca for me. I knew
yeah,
he was a big Star Wars fan. And I'm hoping, part of it I think was he hadn't drawn probably Chewie in a while, but he just knocked it out of the park. And I love it. But, again, it's like, so that's sort of my I guess, as you say, my commission thing is I
yeah.
never really know what to ask for
Uh,
because I don't really want the guy drawing the book he's famous for. I want a page or a cover from that book. I
Yeah.
don't want him doing it. I'm not big on really recreations or anything like that.
Interesting.
Or yeah. So where I was going with this is, again, now it ties into Seinfeld. So a couple of years ago, I started an all Bizarro Superman sketchbook. So I will hire people, I will commission them to do me a Bizarro
Amazing.
Superman only
Amazing.
in the
In their
book.
style.
And so it
Amazing.
is all everybody who's in there, and it's all Bizarro Superman. And the book, I just got an amazing piece, and I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen the scan of it. Um, again, thank you, COVID. Walt Simonson took a couple of commissions, and I managed to get
Wow.
Walt did an incredible piece of how do I describe it? It's Superman tearing his Superman, Bizarro Superman tearing his Superman suit off to reveal the Clark
The
Kent
Clark Kent underneath.
underneath. And it's very Walt, but it is Bizarro, and it is just great.
And you've been
And
collecting these for since Seinfeld?
a little after, a little
A little
after,
after,
a
wow.
little after,
One day
yeah.
you're gonna have to ask DC to publish those.
If they ever wanted to, I'd be more than proud. It is my pride and joy. There are just some wonderful pieces in there by
Sounds
a
amazing.
lot of artists, especially artists that I've at least in some way, shape, or form gotten to know personally
Yeah.
a little bit, which is makes it extra special to me.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
it's great. One day I will meet you in real life, and I will hopefully get a chance to flip through that. It's amazing. Sounds incredible. It's funny you bring up both Art Adams and Walt Simonson because those are my next questions. It's so
Oh,
funny. It's like we're in tune together because Walt doesn't sell his art, right? You're
yeah.
not going to get a page of Thor. Or I mean, I'm a huge fan of Thor. I'm a huge fan of Manhunter. I got those big IDW
Yep. Yep.
reprints
Yep.
because I feel like this is my only chance to get it. Is that perhaps a commission artist for you?
Well, it's interesting. On one of those, I think on one of the Thor books at San Diego, Scott Dunbier,
Who
who
does
is
those
the
books?
editor of those books, started doing this sort of sub special edition where basically they would do these dinners at San Diego, and you could buy a spot at the dinner, and then whoever the guest is would sketch like in 10 of those IDW books. So you could get an original sketch in a
What?
book.
Wow.
And Walt did one of those, and I had him do a Thor in one of those, sort of a version of one of his covers in that. But I thought it was sort of breaking my own rule a little bit.
Yeah.
A, because it's Walter. B, because it was in the book, which was perhaps different in its
Yeah.
own way.
Yeah.
I've been lucky enough, like Walter is very generous to charity, and so he did a wonderful um, Manhunter Batman piece a couple of years ago for a charity auction, and I won that
Oh
piece.
wow.
Many, many years ago, in my early days of visiting San Diego, and it's kind of a funny story, which I actually wrote about in God, where the hell did I write about it? It must be. Oh boy, it's so long ago. I think I wrote about it in maybe a Tio Morrow's book. One of like the maybe it's like a Walter Simonson art book that they
Yeah.
did, or
Yeah.
an interview book with him. I think maybe it's in that, or maybe it's in. God, is it in one of? Is there a graphic collectibles hardcover? Maybe it's a graphic collectibles hardcover. Anyway, long story short is God, I have to tell this whole story. Who is the wonderful artist? Charles Vess's wife. Okay,
Okay.
I'm trying to remember everything about this story. This is the part I don't exactly remember. Charles Vess's wife was perhaps either in a car accident or was suffering from an illness, and they did not have insurance. And
Yeah.
so at the San Diego that year, I think Scott and the San Diego people helped arrange a charity auction to raise money for Charles Vess's wife's medical bills. And I helped out. If I remember, I helped organize a little bit here and there. But what I definitely did was I think I gave them an autographed Seinfeld script for the auction. And then Walter volunteered basically a commission of anything you want. That was
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
idea. And the auction happened. It was at the show. This is before, I mean, the internet existed, but there was no online bidding. You had to be there and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And nowadays, I think that all the pieces would sell for healthier numbers. But at the time, how does one say it? There was a lot of like, they were starting the Walter piece, and it was like, $100, $125.
Yeah.
And obviously this was an important thing because the money was going
Yeah.
to, Vess's wife, but also it just was like, this is an incredible opportunity to get this
Yeah.
thing. And, again, I want to say I yelled out a very healthy number. I
Yeah.
jumped the bidding to a very healthy number that now seems like nothing, but at the time was
Yeah.
I think it was well received and generous.
Yeah.
And, Walter was like, I'm going to do something special. And Scott
Yeah.
was like, I'm going to make sure and take care of it.
Yeah.
And, I basically asked for, I basically what I wanted, which was just, Thor and the bridge and as, just like, this is
Yeah.
what I wanted.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted,
Yeah.
I wanted
Yeah.
Walt Simonson,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
Anyway, time goes by and Scott calls me. He goes, I've got the piece and I'm coming to dinner. He comes up to LA and a bunch of us comic art guys that knew each other at the time get together for dinner. We're over at this wonderful little Greek place that's no longer here in LA called Sophie. Or if it's here, it's different management. But anyway, we go in, Scott shows up, he brings the thing, he opens it up. He hands it to me to open up, and I open it up and I pull it out. And I think we had said somewhere along the way, I'd made a joke like, it's like, well, what do you want for all that money? And I was like, Frog Thor, ha 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 ha. No, seriously, I want, whatever.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
Bless you.
I sneezed. I apologize. So, ha ha ha, Frog Thor, and he brings it out, and I pull it out, and I open it up, and there is a giant picture of Frog Thor holding the hammer.
Wow.
And but it's also kind of loose. Like it's like kind of like like it's a sketch, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I was thinking,
Yeah.
but I was definitely a weird combination of it's Frog Thor, which I didn't ask for, but maybe they got confused. But also, I'm not quite sure this is the I'm going to take care of you piece that I think I was expecting.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there speechless,
Yeah.
and no one will look me in the eye.
Yeah.
They're all embarrassed for me.
Yeah.
Like they all have that. And by the way, this is the other reason I don't do a lot of commissions is over the years, back when I used to do them here and there, a lot of times they were so hit and miss, especially when
Yeah.
they were at shows and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so a lot of now when I do Bizarro, I'm willing to kind of go, look, I'll pay you what it's worth,
Yeah.
but I want it in my book and I want you to draw it at home. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
you to spend your time.
Exactly.
So anyway, no one will look me in the eye. They're all looking at me like you got the bad sketch, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what? And I'm truly speechless. And at some point, Scott signals for the waiter, and the waiter comes over and goes, I believe this is for you, Mr. Mandel, or something like
Of
that.
course.
And I recount this story, like I said, I think it's in a graphic collectible, not graphic collectibles, graffiti designs hardcover. And basically, I pull out the greatest Walter Simonson Thor piece you've ever seen, which is
Wow.
the cover to that collection.
Yeah.
And in it, I tell the
Oh.
story, and they printed the Thor, the frog piece. So the frog piece now is printed art. Technically, it's published, so
Yeah.
it makes it, But anyway, just kind of an incredible story. So I have a almost printed Thor piece. I mean, it is a printed Thor piece and a printed Thor frog piece. And I have a couple of other pieces that Walter has sold, one or two others in the past, where I have a Dr. Fate piece that he sold like in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And I have a incredible Batman Joker giant Detective Comics piece that he did that was heavily influential on the Sam Hamm end scene in the church. It's them like on the top of the church.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
Detective Comics where I believe the story goes he did it originally as a commission for a guy that loved Batman commissions and maybe traded him for some sort of shadow box or something that the guy used to make
Yeah.
and traded it to him. And then DC saw the piece and basically commissioned a story for the cover.
Oh, wow.
And because it then became published,
Yeah.
the guy only liked unpublished commissions, and he sold it to
Oh.
another dealer named Jim Warden, who used to run DOA art.
Yeah.
And years later, Jim had a big piece of property and was like a farm and needed a tractor. And I basically bought that Walter piece, and it's
Oh,
an
wow.
incredible piece.
Amazing.
So I do have a couple of published pieces in that sense. I would love to get I'd love to get a true run from the run Thor cover. and I'm also quite the fan of his, I love his Star Wars covers too, I wouldn't
Yeah.
mind one of those, his
Yeah.
Marvel covers, and I love his Raiders of the Lost Ark
Yeah.
original adaptation
Yeah.
covers as well.
Right.
So there you go. Yeah.
So if you know him well, like where does he keep all this art? His career is like over 50
I
years,
think
right? Before we were born.
he's got a house and it's in the house.
It's
I
in the
don't
house.
know.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So, I mean, it looks like, that we grew up in the 80s comics. So these
Yep.
artists are we know them and we love them. Art Adams, Walt Simonson. Well, do you have any affinity to any of the Image guys, McFarlane, Jim Lee? These guys, are they on your
Oh, I
collection as
mean,
well?
1,000%. I mean, a little bit, dare I say, less of those books,
Yeah.
which I read them. I read a lot of them and I
Yep.
enjoyed them. I don't quite know if they stuck with me that the
Yeah.
way they, like, to this day, I can tell you about Wildcats.
Yeah.
I can tell you about these things. I read a lot of Spawn for the first,
Yeah.
50
Yeah.
excuse me. I read a lot of Spawn for the first 50 odd issues or
Yeah.
so, and I ultimately kind of gave up. I mean, I
Yeah.
love Todd McFarlane. I remember when Todd McFarlane came onto Infinity Inc. I mean,
Yeah.
that's when I,
Same.
first discovered Todd
It's
McFarlane.
so funny.
So I read a lot of that stuff. I never really had a lot of art. I think I maybe had a Jim Lee like Wildcats piece, but I was a fan from, obviously, I guess, I have X-Men art by
Yeah.
him, which I truly loved. I
Yeah.
have Spider-Man, Hulk, and Infinity Inc. art by Todd McFarlane that I truly loved. So I do have, examples, like I have Mark Silvestri stuff, but again, X-Men and
X-Men related.
Wolverine,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I wish I had Eric Larson's Spider-Man. I don't. I wish
Yeah.
I did. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I was a fan of that.
Yeah.
Um, and I really wish, but I'm not sure it'll ever happen because obviously the prices now. I wish I did have a Rob Liefeld New Mutants piece, not because they're worth more. It was something I read and enjoyed,
Same. Yeah.
and I
Agree.
just sort of never quite found it, and
Yeah.
now it just seems too late with the
Too
way
late.
the
Yeah.
numbers are. But
Yeah.
one of these days I'll find a good maybe. I'm thinking I bet I can still find a good maybe Hawk and Dove piece by Rob, and I'll get that, and
Yeah,
that'd be
the
fun to
earlier
have. Yeah,
earlier stuff. His early stuff
yeah,
was like inked by Carl Kiesel. That stuff looks really great
yes,
right back
yes,
then.
exactly.
Now I mean, Young Blood for me was one of the big books that came out. I would love to have something out of that for personally for
Again,
me.
I
But
read it all. I enjoyed it at the time, but
yeah,
I guess and again, I like all these guys. I
yeah,
love, Rob is like when I post a piece of comic art, Rob's like the first guy to like
yeah,
sometimes make a comment or
yeah,
like put a little thumbs, whatever, like,
yeah,
heart, like it, whatever.
yeah,
So he's a great guy. I think I bought stuff from him. It's, again, it's whatever. It just, what can I say? Like at the end of the day, I read Youngblood. I remember it. I enjoy it. I'm
yeah.
not sure I ever felt like I had to own art from Youngblood, but
Yeah.
other stuff he
But
did,
New
I
Mutants,
wanted
yeah,
to.
you're right.
Yeah,
That's like that was a part of his career and a part of the X-Men story that was just
yeah.
so important, such a landmark. Do you listen to his podcast by any chance, Rob Liefeld?
I haven't, and I need to, and
Yeah.
I
It's
will,
great.
and I
When
should. Yeah.
you listen to him, I guess he's a year older than you, and his energy, just like yours, for what you guys do is just
Again, when
incredible.
we bump into each other, whether it's at San Diego or whatnot, and by the way, his wife, who is a twin,
Yeah.
they were on Seinfeld.
Oh, really?
Yes,
I think wow.
yes, they were on Seinfeld back in the day as they were dating. God, I'm trying to remember. I think they were dating Kramer and Mickey. I can't remember. I
There was
believe.
oh my
Yeah,
god, wow, what a connection
yeah,
that was. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, and so from your comic book collecting, you obviously know these comic book people, and you're writing comics as well. You said you've written a
A
few of
little
them.
bit, a little bit, a
I
handful,
know
handful. Yeah,
I found the Hank Johnson Agent of Hydra issue, so I
that
was
was a
looking
fun
at
one.
that.
Yeah.
Is that how it happens? You meet these people at the shows and like, hey, David, can you want to
That
write a
one was a
comic?
particularly wildly long gestation period. I actually pitched that idea to Jimmy and Joe, Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe
Yeah,
Quesada,
when they were the editors in Marvel Knights.
when they were Marvel
Oh
Knights.
wow, that's a long time ago.
And then what happened, I believe somewhere in there was that whole crazy thing where there was the Fury Max storyline, and allegedly Avi Arad got angry because he was going to make a deal for a Nick Fury thing,
Yeah.
and then with like George Clooney. Again, I'm making this is what I remember, and then they got angry when they read this book that
Yeah.
kind of like, because Fury was like fucking hookers and things like that. And so all of a sudden it was like, even though it was Agent of Hydra and it wasn't Nick Fury per se, the idea of doing a comedy book in Shield World kind of went away.
Oh,
And a million years went by, and I don't even remember exactly 1,000% how it happened, but like my buddy Jerry Dugan is a real good friend of mine. Is the current X-Men writer
yeah.
actually, and
Yeah.
he was writing Marauders, and he's written
Yeah.
Long Run on Deadpool, and just wonderful, great guy. But also
Yeah.
we met. He used to work at Golden Apple Comics. He was behind the
Oh.
counter. We
Oh,
kind of hit
wow.
it off, and been friends now 20 years. But anyway,
Mm.
somehow through him and one of the editors, they were having one of these weird months where I can't remember. It was like Hydra had taken over the earth, and so you could kind of do anything or something.
Yeah.
And I sort of pitched it as a free standalone, and they paired me up with Michael Walsh,
Michael Walsh,
who's a
yeah.
wonderful artist, and really kind of captured what I wanted to do, which was, again, this comedy book and whatever. And it was really fun to do. And then, of course, I got to buy all the original art for more than, of course, that what they paid me to write the book.
Yeah.
But it was really fun. And so I've done now. I do it when it's fun. People ask me when it's fun. And I don't think I have the desire to, what's the word? I'm not looking to take over X-Men for 2 years.
That's that was my
But
next question.
but I'm not.
Oh my
But
god.
my buddy Jerry will often run shit by me and give me like run shit by me, and I get to throw in on it,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I used to like at Seinfeld
Seinfeld,
or
yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And so that scratches that itch for me. I get to, once in a while I get to give him an idea, and he goes, "Oh, that's great. I can do something with that."
Yeah.
And that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
So the stuff I've done, like I said, is it's when it's fun. And like I said, also at the end of the day, I'm a comedy writer, and most
Yeah.
of the time nobody's looking for a 2-year funny X-Men run. Do you know what I'm saying? Let's just be honest. That's not what
I would. That would be
well, thank
amazing.
you.
That
Thank you.
would be
That's not what
incredible.
anybody wants. But that being said, so like, Hank Johnson, Agent of Hydra,
Yeah.
is a funny standalone. I did I was very good friends with Dave Stevens before he passed.
Oh,
I was
wow.
very involved with getting the Rocketeer back into print with his
Oh.
family and IDW, and again Scott
Oh,
Dunbier.
wow. Great.
And at some point or another, they were doing these like Rocketeer tales, and I
Yeah.
got to do a little six
Yeah.
pager that I a 6 or 8 pager
Yeah.
that I love, that I absolutely love. Just I love it. I did it with uh, J Bone did the art, just
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Just love doing.
Yeah.
About a year ago, I got contacted by an editor at DC to do a standalone Harley Quinn, whatever it
Ooh.
was called, Black, White, and Red. And
Yeah.
then the next thing I knew, I was able to get Adam Hughes, who's someone I've known forever. We share the love of Star Wars,
Wow.
to do the art.
Wow.
I bought that art too. I
Nice.
own all the art to anything I've ever worked on. So I've
Nice.
done these little things where I can be funny, and I have other ideas. I have a Superman story I always wanted to do, but I don't, but it's basically it's Superman's gay crush. So I don't
Yeah.
expect anyone's going to let me do it anytime soon. And one of these days I probably should do a Bizarro story.
Yes.
At one point Jerry and I had an idea for a Nightcrawler thing when they brought him back to life that I think he pitched and they were not interested in, but also I think Claremont ended up coming back to do Nightcrawler, which as well he should. But
Yeah.
it was a story that I really liked the idea of. But like I said, so I would have done that with
Yeah.
Jerry doing the heavy lifting. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
like I said, I'm not necessarily looking to do more than ever an 8 pager or a single, or
Okay.
maybe I've got a mini series in me one day, but
Yeah.
that's about it. Yeah.
Do you
And by
work
the way, part of it, I'll be honest with you, is when you go in and do an 8 pager like that, again, editorial is very helpful. Although interestingly enough, the editor who set it up ended up leaving, and then there was a new editor, and he had some content issues with the Harley Quinn thing, where I will simply say there was one thing that if they had said ultimately, I changed it a little, but if they had said no to the change, I would have pulled it. I would have just said, I'm not, just don't pay me. I'm
Yeah.
not doing it,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I'll simply say, a little bit of the beauty is when you do these little things, there's not a lot of
Yeah.
editorial
Yeah.
whatever. I'm just doing it, and I'm doing it because it's fun.
Yeah.
And the honest answer is I still want to read comics every week and buy comics every week. And if all of a sudden I hate comic books because I have a bad experience writing them and I get angry or whatever
Yeah.
about comics,
Yeah.
then my life is over. You might as
Yeah.
well poke my eyes out.
Oh
So
my
that's
God, that's
kind of my
great. Yeah.
attitude towards
Yeah.
popping into comics. Yeah.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. When you were doing these comics, do you work in like a Stan Lee Marvel style, or do you
No,
do
in
cross?
fact, my God bless my artists. I basically I write a sitcom, and then each one of them has very much. I've sometimes tried to write what I think the panels are, but invariably they are very helpful. So I'm kind of writing a full page. I'm writing a sitcom. I'm writing a
Sitcom
10-page or
script,
12.
right?
Yeah, I'm writing a sitcom
Jerry
script.
enters, says a
Yep,
line, says a
exactly,
line.
and then they're helping me really turn it into what it is. So it is neither the Marvel method nor the DC method. It is the idiot comedy sitcom right half-hour guy method is my method.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Okay, we're running over 2 hours here, so I just wanted to get a couple last things in here. 'Cause one of my questions was, do you have a 12-issue run, and what character would it be? So I guess that's
Well,
not
the Nightcrawler thing, I'll tell you about. I don't know if I've ever talked about this anywhere, or maybe I teased at it, but I'll tell you. I'll tell you the idea. Nightcrawler was dead. Again, like lots of characters, he was dead.
Wait, what year is this? This is like what?
This is
Before the
like
Krakoa
5
stuff,
years
right?
ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Before the what?
The
Oh yeah,
Krakoa
before
stuff.
the yes, way before Hickman and Krakoa and all that
Okay.
kind of stuff. And he had been dead, and I don't remember how he died. I know he was dead,
He's dead.
and because I was like long done with X-Men, quite honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
and really Hickman really brought me back to X-Men,
Yeah.
and then Jerry and some of the other guys. But so Nightcrawler was dead, and at some point they were bringing him back, and they were looking for pitches, and I was a huge fan of the Vision Scarlet Witch miniseries
Mhm.
that sort of had an influence a little bit on the Vision Scarlet
Yep.
Witch Disney Plus
Yeah.
show, and had a little bit of an influence, I think, a little bit on Tom King as well, or at least
Yeah.
part of it
Yeah.
on the Vision miniseries. I was a huge fan of that, which was basically Vision and Scarlet Witch moving to suburbia
Yeah.
and kind of
Yeah.
trying to make a go of it.
Yeah.
And so my basic idea was, if Nightcrawler is dead and is coming back to life, and if memory serves, at the time, the storyline that was going on in X-Men was called Schism, and it was like Wolverine versus Cyclops, and the team split on those
Oh,
sides, and
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was reading
yeah.
those. Yeah.
And
Okay.
Wolverine was like running the school. And
Yeah.
anyway, it was Schism. And Nightcrawler was going to come back and kind of be able to dip his toe into both sides of the world and where he fit in and try and bridge the gap. And I read some of what the story became, but it was its own thing. And I remember talking to Jerry about all this. And I said, no, I think if you come back from death, you have a new appreciation of life. And I said, look, he can come back and he can talk to them about the schism and whatever. But I said, whatever it is, he comes back. And on the last page of the book, he needs to go and knock on Amanda Steffen's door and go, I'm alive. I'm so sorry for what I put you through. Life is too short. Let's get married. And that was going to be the final moment of issue 1.
Okay.
And the front image of issue 2 was basically going to be her fiance is standing, or her husband. We never got this far, but basically her boyfriend, her fiance, her husband is, may I introduce you to my fiance?
Yeah.
And then basically, graduate style, he was going to win her, steal her back,
Yeah.
and they were going to get married, and he was going to try and lead his life. So we never quite got much further
Yeah.
than that, but
Yeah.
that was the Nightcrawler story
Oh,
I
wow.
wanted to do, which is not necessarily, obviously, a superhero story per
Yeah.
se,
Yeah.
but it was about what happens if Nightcrawler dies and comes back. What do you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
And I figured you try and fix your life. And that was the idea. We
Oh,
never did
that
it.
sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, that
So
sounds great.
there was my one X-Men story. So there you go. Yeah.
Oh, well, hopefully one day you will you'll find a
Eh,
way to get
the
in
next
there
time
or
they
do
kill
something.
him and then bring him back, I'll do it. Yeah.
That's right. You need that to
Yeah.
happen again. Well, and now
Well,
apparently they
now they
never die,
die
right?
they die every issue and they get
Yeah.
brought back 4 and 5 times. So yeah.
We're recording this on the weekend of the new Batman film. Excited or not?
Very excited. I mean, again, I'll go. I mean, I love, I'm a fan. I like superhero movies. I am very excited. It sounds like there's a lot, it sounds like, they keep talking about how it's a mystery and it
Yeah.
obviously has elements of like the long Halloween and
Yeah.
a little bit maybe of year one, but a
Yeah.
mystery and all this kind of stuff. And I am thrilled about that. I'm excited to see it all. And I'm excited that it's not another origin movie. And all of that is great because these superhero movies should be like James Bond movies, which should just be every everyone is a standalone wonderful adventure like
Yeah.
reading the comics, and they
Yeah.
keep retelling origins and then recasting and then retelling the origin. And I just bravo to, like, they've made 3 Spider-Man movies and they've not shown us the goddamn origin. I love it. And I love that they're doing a Batman movie with, hopefully, again, maybe there's a flashback. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like there is.
Yeah.
However, it does seem like Batman still growls.
Yeah.
It sounds like yet it's a mystery. Again, I haven't seen it. I've just seen the
Yeah.
previews, but it
Yeah.
does look like another guy. It looks like the Riddler either knows or figures out that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and somehow the Riddler is now connected. It sounds like in a hush-like way,
Yeah.
perhaps to the Waynes and the Wayne family. Like maybe there's some of Hush glued in there. And I'm just so sick of everybody knowing everybody's secret identity and everybody. So there are things I've seen in the trailer. And again, I will go see this thing.
Yeah.
But I have an open mind. I'm excited, but I do always worry about a little bit of like when I see things where I go, I feel like I've seen versions of this.
Yeah.
So who knows? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah. I'm wondering how, if how old we get, we'll just we get to be those guys are just like, oh, we've seen it before. But then the kids, they love it, right? I mean, so
They
kids
do,
who
they
grew
do.
up
And
with the Nolan
I get
verse,
a lot
right?
of enjoyment. I go with my kids and I get
Yeah.
enjoyment when I don't like something and they do. And I
Yeah.
tell them all the time, you're absolutely allowed. You should like something I don't like, and I'm fine with you liking something I don't like. And let's talk about it. I'll tell you why. You tell me
Yeah.
why. It's a conversation. I love it.
Yeah.
And again, I know nothing. I haven't seen it. I
Yeah.
hope it's great. The
Yeah.
end. Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously you're a Marvel Universe fan as well, Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, again, some better than others.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but whatever the next one is, I don't even know what the next one is. Doctor Strange, I'll be
Yeah.
there. Thor, Ragnarok, I'll be there.
I always wonder how might you watch these movies as a writer and a fan? Like you have a unique perspective when you watch these films, or do you? Or you just like, I'm just going to turn my
I
brain and
think
watch it.
unfortunately, and again, I'm not sure any writer can, escape it, is, I definitely, there are things you notice. I mean, you just
Yeah.
can't help it. You notice sort of structure problems. You notice
Yeah.
repetition. You
Yeah.
notice when these movies sort of come,
Yeah.
there are things you notice. I think I notice, like, if you look at like the first Thor movie, you can feel the budget constraints. There are definitely times where like the
Yeah.
destroyer comes down from Asgard and like knocks over a Chevy pickup truck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a tiny town. It's not exactly the destroyer. Do you know what I mean? I just,
Yeah.
there are just things like that
Yeah.
like, I don't think I don't mean I'm above average, but that the average non-industry person going to the movie notices. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, look, I'm the first to say shit like that takes me out of it. And I try and, allow for it.
Yeah.
Where I get a little bummed out, and this is about all movies in general, I just can't. I'm sick of the repetition. I'm just so
Yeah.
sick of Blofeld being,
Yeah. The
James
bad guy,
Bond's
James Bond. Yeah.
brother,
Yeah.
like that thing that runs through all these movies.
Yeah.
It just makes me crazy, and it's unfortunately a thing that just is. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say, and it does. Maybe it hits me harder than others. I will tell you, and again, I don't think this is an original thought. I fucking can't take Easter eggs. I'm fine with them existing, except when they masquerade for plot.
Yeah.
And there are so
Interesting.
many bad movies that just think, oh, if he just picks up that thing from the 7 movies ago, that's a scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh. So
Yeah.
again, that's me. I don't know. Is that because I'm a writer? I don't know. It
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. If you, I'm sure that you're not on TikTok because that's what
I am
all those
not. I am not.
that's what all those videos are about. They're picking out those Easter eggs and going, okay, now I'm going to
Well,
tell
and by the way,
you
my
when it's came
son
from.
looks at all of that kind of stuff and tells me about these things, and again, I appreciate that he's doing that, but I've tried to say to them, him and my daughter, like, that is not a story. And I
Yeah.
mean, again, it's like, but going back to, again, Seinfeld days, like, we would have like, you're looking for ideas, and people would pitch an idea for Seinfeld. We were looking for new writers or something, and people would go like, well, I was thinking, like, Jerry goes to like a swap meet, and okay, that's a location, it's not a story.
Yeah.
And to some extent, an Easter egg is an Easter egg, it's not a goddamn story.
Yeah.
And some of these
Yeah.
movies, more than others, and certain franchises more than others, are it's just whatever you want to call it, fan service and
Yeah.
Easter eggs in lieu
Exactly.
of plot, and I can't stand it.
Yeah. Interesting. David, will I see you at the San Diego Comic-Con this year if it's happening?
I don't know, is
Okay.
the honest answer. I have definitely fallen into the category of person who has not caught COVID during the COVID
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
and the longer I haven't caught it,
The
perhaps in
more.
certain ways, the more frightened of it I am. Um, I will also simply say, while it's something I continually work on, I'm an overweight guy, which, continues to seem to be on the warning list for COVID,
Yeah.
among other things. It's just, if you see me, you're not going to see me because I'll have my mask on, is my
Sure.
guess.
Sure.
But anyway, not to get political, but the way that this week mask and vaccination requirements seem to have gone out the window,
Yeah.
just seems like an exciting recipe for the next variant where another million people die. And I realize this is not the point of this podcast, but so honestly, the answer is I don't know.
Okay, good. That's good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
But definitely, I will.
Is that
see
the
you.
upbeat ending we were looking for?
Well, I asked you, so that's where it's going. But I will see you, or rather, hear you on your podcast next week. And how many episodes is that going to be?
I think it will eventually be 10, but right now there's 1 in the can. So the first one will be up, and hopefully there'll be another one before that airs. But yes,
obviously you guys are recording this virtually. But
yes.
Isn't Ryan working on a show right now?
Yeah, Ryan's in London working on House of the Dragon. So we do it like this. We do it exactly like this. Basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. David, thank you so much for your time. You've been super generous.
And hey, I'm going to throw this out there, if I may, really quickly, which is every Monday on various social media, if you follow me at David H. Mandel on Instagram or Twitter, I do an original Comic Art Monday where I post a piece from my collection and kind of often tell a little bit of story or why I like it, or maybe how I got various little things. But hashtag Original Comic Art Mondays at David H. Mandel on Instagram or Twitter, and I may start expanding into a prop one as well, where I kind of, and again, it's not always going to be Frank Miller Dark Knight. It's going to be stuff I like and cool stuff. Anyway,
have you posted that G.I. Joe 2 cover?
Not yet. That's actually coming up. It's coming up. Yeah.
Okay, great, excellent. All right, thanks, David.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to make that Mondays, so you can you'll see it. Yes, I'm going to make it next Mondays. Yes.
All right, fantastic. All right, thanks, David. Have a good sleep.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
The Hyper Room.
The Hyper Room.
Thanks for listening. Thanks to my guest, David Mandel. Please check out thehyperroom.com for the show notes on this episode and to find other interviews with creators like Eric Larson, Matt Wagner, Andy Park, and more. And follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Hyper Room.